The whole kingdom knows me as the joke, the live-in husband of the Sioux clan. The nobody who married up into a family of monsters and brings nothing to the table but a pulse. And here's the part that took me a while to appreciate. They're completely right. I am the joke. What none of them know, not the elders, not the rivals, not even my own terrifying wife, is that the joke is going to cultivate off her heart. Every time that woman feels one true thing about me, I get stronger, and, it turns out, a little harder for her to look away from. That's the part that ruins her, eventually. The colder she plays it, the more she can't stop her eyes from drifting back to the husband she's supposed to despise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The trouble, on day one, is she spent years feeling exactly nothing. So let me start at the beginning, the morning I woke up in the worst seat in the kingdom. 2 days ago, I was a divorce lawyer. That was the whole job, back in a world with traffic lights and instant noodles. People who used to love each other sat across a table from me, and I found the one clause that decided who walked away with what. I was good at it. Reading a room is a skill, who's lying, who's bluffing, where the soft spot is. Then I pulled a stupid all-nighter on a settlement, put my head down on the desk for 1 minute, and woke up somewhere with no traffic lights at all. I woke up as Jong-mu. The body came with a free starter pack of memories, and let me tell you, I'd have asked for a refund. 26 years old. Married 8 years into the Sioux clan as a live-in husband, which, I learned fast, is the single lowest rung a man can occupy in this world. You don't marry a woman here. If you've got no name and no power, you marry into her family, you take their roof, you eat their rice. And everyone gets to treat you like furniture that occasionally needs feeding. Jong-mu had been doing it for 8 years. 8 years of bowing, of yes elder, of eating last and standing in the back. The man had the spine of a wet napkin, and the moment his life hit rock bottom he apparently checked out and left the lease to me. Thanks for that. So that's where I am. A place called Cloudfall City, in a kingdom called Yunzhou, in a world where the only thing anyone respects is strength. And by strength they mean cultivation, chi, realms, the whole ladder. I had it memorized by the end of my first day from listening to servants gossip. Body temper at the bottom, then chi si, pillar, gold core, nascent, spirit sovereign, and Tao ascendant at the top, where people stop being people and start being legends who can split a mountain because they're in a bad mood. Each realm has its stages. Most folks claw their way up over decades, swallowing pills that cost more than a house, and die somewhere around the middle wondering where their life went. And me? I checked. The body had a cultivation level 2. Body temper, the very bottom. Not even the bottom of the ladder, the dirt the ladder is standing in. 26 years old and weaker than the kid who swept the courtyard. In a world that worships power, I was a rounding error. But here's the thing they kept whispering about, the name that made even the sour-faced elders lower their voices. The Sioux clan wasn't a joke. The Sioux clan was terrifying. And the reason was a single person, my wife, Su Wan-ching. I hadn't even seen her yet on that first morning, and I already knew the legend, because the whole city ran on it. 27 years old. A sword cultivator. Once in 3 generations genius who'd hit goldcore before 25, a realm most people don't sniff in a full lifetime. They called her the Frostflower of Cloudfall, which sounds like a tea but apparently meant beautiful enough to stop your heart and strong enough to stop it permanently. She'd carried the Sioux clan on her back since her father died. And on his deathbed, that father, the old clan head, had made one last, baffling request, that his daughter honor an old debt and marry the Jang boy. Nobody knew why. The leading theory was that the old man had gone soft in the head at the end. Marriage had been a humiliation for the Sioux clan from day one, a stain they tolerated only because you don't break a dead patriarch's word lightly in a world this superstitious. So they kept the husband, and they made sure he knew, every single day, exactly how little he was worth. By midday I'd been shoved by a cousin, ignored by 3 servants, and handed a list of chores by an elder who didn't bother to learn my face. By evening I understood the shape of my new life completely, and I'll be honest, the divorce lawyer in me was almost impressed. It was a perfect little trap. No standing, no power, no allies, married to a woman several realms and one entire universe of class above me, in a clan that wanted me gone. If I'd had a client in this position, I'd have told them to settle and run. Except I didn't get the option to run. Because that evening, they threw a banquet. And the banquet was the trap closing. I should mention, somewhere around noon, while I was hauling water like the kingdom's most overqualified servant, a voice had spoken inside my head. Hearthbond system bound. Welcome, host. A soft gold panel, hanging in the air, just for me. Nobody else so much as blinked. Host. Jiangmu Realm. Body temper devotion. 0 boons. 0. Bond. Su Wan Qing regard. 0%. I'd read enough of these stories at 3 in the morning to know the shape of it. A system. A cheat. The thing that turns the loser into the legend. So naturally I did what any sensible man would do and demanded my signing bonus. Okay, I'd muttered into the well. Starter pack. Beginner's gift. A pill, a technique, a sack of gold, anything. Every system gives the main character a welcome present. No active rewards. You advance through your wife's genuine regard. I'd stared at that little frost blue meter sitting flat on 0. Through her regard, you bound to a man whose wife has never once looked directly at him, and your idea of a cheat is, what, a relationship tracker? Each true milestone she feels toward you pays devotion and a boon. The payout scales with her realm. And that was the part I'd turned over all afternoon while I carried water and got shoved by cousins, because she was goldcore, was several realms above me. And if a real feeling from a woman that powerful paid out scaled to her level, then this wasn't a tip jar. It was the richest vein in the world, locked behind the one thing I couldn't fake, steal, or lawyer my way into. An ice-cold genius actually, genuinely, caring whether I lived or died. The system was very clear about the genuine part. It read her, not me. Flattery paid nothing. Coercion paid nothing. I could grovel for a year and the meter wouldn't twitch. So I had the greatest cheat in the world, and absolutely no way to use it. Because step 1 was make the frost flower of Cloudfall fall for the family doormat, and I was on day 1, and the meter said 0, and they were about to divorce me at dinner. The banquet hall was the nicest room I'd been allowed into, which is to say I was allowed to stand at the edge of it. Silk everywhere, 100 relatives and guests, and at the head of the room, finally, her. The legend had undersold it. Su Wan Qing sat at the high seat like a sword someone had laid across a table, perfectly still, perfectly composed. The kind of stillness that makes a room organize itself around you. Silver black hair past her waist, skin like the first snow of the year, eyes the pale gray of a cold morning, looking at everything and warming to nothing. Deep blue robes, a white sash, and a slender longsword resting against her chair with a faint sheen of frost along the edge. Like a pet that could end the world if it got bored. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She looked the way a mountain looks at the weather. And my idiot heart, well, Jiangmu's heart, but I was driving now. Did a thing it had no business doing for a stranger who'd be free of me by dessert. Don't, I told myself. She is a gold-core sword saint, and you are a parasite with nothing to your name but a borrowed body and a system that judges your love life. Focus. Aunt Sulan focused it for me. She was an elder, plum-colored robes, jade pins, a smile like a paper cut. She stood, and the hall hushed, and she had a servant lay a document on the floor at my feet, because of course she made me read it on the floor. Brother's dying wish has shamed this clan long enough, she announced, warm as a winter pond. 8 years we have fed this guest. Tonight we set our Wanqing free of him. Jiangmu, sign the annulment and go. I looked down at the paper, and the divorce lawyer woke all the way up, because I had read 10,000 of these, and this one was sloppy. No, I said, and stood, and the hall went quiet the way a room does when the furniture clears its throat. This annulment's void, I said, and I let the old courtroom voice come up out of this borrowed chest, calm, almost bored. The tone of someone who has already seen the verdict. Sioux clan law. A union sealed by a clan head's death vow can be dissolved by exactly 2 people, the clan head who sealed it, who is dead, or the bonded heir herself, of her own free word, spoken in open hall. Not an elder, not a proxy. You don't have the authority to end this marriage, Aunt Su Lan. You're asking me to sign a document you legally cannot issue. I held the silence, the way you do right before the knife, which makes it a forged clan head decree. And I'm fairly sure I don't have to tell you what the penalty for forging the old head seal is in this family. Su Lan's face went the exact color of her robes, and the whole hall, slowly, turned to look at the one person who actually could end it. The one person who hadn't said a word. Su Wanqing looked at me. Not through me. At me. For the first time in 8 years of this body's memory, those cold gray eyes actually landed on my face, and there was something in them I hadn't earned and didn't expect. Not warmth. Nothing as generous as that. But a flicker of something sharp and reassessing, the look you give a chair when it turns out the chair can talk, and what it said was correct. "Is he wrong, Aunt?" she asked. Quiet. Even. It went through the hall like the edge of that frost-bright sword. "Was the decree forged?" Su Lan opened her mouth. Closed it. That was answer enough. Wanqing stood, and the scrape of her chair sent a tremor through 100 cultivators. "When there is nothing to sign," she said. "My father's word stands until I end it, and I have not." She paused. Her gaze came back to me, one heartbeat longer than it needed to, that small line appearing between her brows like she was filing me under a new heading. "Sit, husband, before someone helps you down." It wasn't kindness. It barely cleared the bar of civility. But it was real, the first true thing that woman had ever sent in my direction instead of past it, and the system flared like a short circuit behind my eyes. Milestone. First honest regard from Su Wanqing. Regard. 0% to 4%. +1 boon plus 12 devotion. Boon withheld. Bond too new to channel. Stored. 4%. A trickle, not a flood. The system wouldn't even hand over the boon yet. Bond too new, it said, like a bank holding a transfer. But I felt the 4%. A thin thread of warmth uncurled somewhere under my ribs, the first chi this borrowed body had ever held that didn't belong to a chore. It wasn't a realm jump. It wasn't a montage. It was a single coin dropped into an empty jar. And then a second panel slid up under the first, and this one I had not read about at 3 in the morning. Devotion refines the vessel. The bloom. Tier 1. It's hard to describe what that felt like from the inside, because it was small, but it was the kind of small you feel in your spine. The slump this body had worn for 8 years eased a half-inch out of my shoulders. The tired gray around my eyes lifted, just slightly, like someone had wiped a film off a window. My jaw sat different. I didn't get handsome in a thunderclap, I got clearer, the way a smudged photo gets clearer. A man you'd have walked past became, very faintly, a man you might look at twice. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I sat there in my doormat clothes thinking the cheat for the realm's undisputed matriarch is a glow-up. But then I clocked the catch, and the catch was beautiful. I could hide my cultivation, I fully intended to. A live-in husband who suddenly has chi gets a knife. But this wasn't chi. This was just a man slowly looking like himself. There's no law against eating well and standing up straight. I could not hide it if I tried, and I realized, with the slow grin of a lawyer who's just found the loophole in his own contract, that I didn't want to. Because across the hall, Su Wanqing's gaze, already turned away, already a mountain regarding the weather, came back. Just for a beat. Just a flick, the kind of glance you don't decide to make. She looked at the husband she'd been ignoring for 8 years, and a small line appeared between her brows. The expression of someone who has walked past a painting 1,000 times and only now noticed it's been moved. She caught herself doing it. I watched her catch herself, saw the cold pour back over her face on purpose, saw her stare very deliberately at the far wall like the far wall had insulted her. The meter behind my eyes ticked. Not a milestone, just a flicker, but it ticked. Oh, I thought, and kept my doormat face nailed on while something entirely undoormat happened behind it. Oh, this is going to be fun. But I'd spent a career listening to the sound a thing makes, and that coin hit the bottom and rang like there was room for a fortune. 4%, for one cold sentence she half regretted. I sat there with my doormat face on and did the arithmetic that would run the rest of my life. If 4 was a coin, what was 40? What was a smile? What was the day a woman like that actually, against every law of sense, chose me? So I'm telling no one, obviously. A live-in husband who suddenly starts cultivating doesn't get congratulations in a world like this, he gets a cage and a feeding schedule. Or a quiet knife. I keep the eager, mindless grin locked in place. Let them keep the joke. The joke is the disguise. Banquet stitched itself back together around me, the elders pretending the last 2 minutes hadn't happened, When I kept my eyes down and watched the little meter instead. 4%. And beneath it, something new the system hadn't bothered to announce, a hair-thin line of warm light I could just see if I looked sideways, running from my chest across the hall to where she sat. A thread. Nobody else could see it. She couldn't see it. And next to it, a number I didn't understand, and the system wouldn't explain when I asked. On thread established. The Hearthbond had spent an eternity lecturing me on regard, boons, and the promise of free power. About the thread it went quiet, the specific, careful quiet of a thing that doesn't tell you the price until you're in too deep to hand the goods back. I looked up the length of that invisible thread at my wife, beautiful, lethal, already done looking at me, already a mountain regarding the weather again. When I thought, all right. I have to make that woman care if I live. For real. Or I'm the joke forever. And then, down the table, Aunt Sulan leaned toward a young man in gold I hadn't clocked yet, handsome, smug, eyes fixed on Wanqing like she was a prize with his name half written on the tag. When over the noise of the hall I caught her murmur the words that turned my survivable little evening into a war. Patience. The death vow has one other way to break, nephew. If the husband dies, she's free to wed you. A sip of wine. A paper-cut smile. And husbands like that, they die all the time. The thing about surviving a banquet that was supposed to end you is that nobody throws you a parade for it. They just adjust the story. By breakfast the next morning, the Sioux clan had decided that the live-in husband hadn't been clever at all, he'd been lucky. A blind dog finds a bone. A broken clock is right twice a day. The forged annulment had been a clumsy mistake on Aunt Sulan's part, the gossip went, when the doormat had simply been standing in the right spot when it fell over. That was the version everyone agreed on, because the other version, that the family joke had read clan law better than the clan's own elders, was a thing nobody in that compound was willing to say out loud before noon. Fine by me. Let them keep the joke. I'd already learned the joke was the only armor I owned. I'd been awake since dawn, and I'd spent the quiet hours doing the thing I do best, which is reading the terms of a bad deal. My deal was this: one borrowed body parked at the absolute bottom of a world that worships strength, one ice-cold wife several realms and one entire social universe above me, and one scheming aunt who'd just learned she couldn't divorce me legally and would therefore, obviously, move to the next option, one system whose idea of a starting bonus was make the most powerful woman in the city care if you live. I'd turned 4% of her regard into a single thin coin of chi and a face that was, very slightly, becoming a problem for her. That was my entire war chest, 4% and a good jaw. Well, naturally, over a bowl of cold millet I'd been served last and grudgingly, I tried to cheat. Okay, I murmured to the gold panel only I could see, the little frost blue meter sitting smug at 4%. Let's talk efficiency. You pay out when she feels something real about me. Real takes time. I don't have time. So here's my proposal. I go find my wife. I tell her she's the most magnificent creature I've ever laid eyes on, which, for the record, is true. When you pay me for the sentiment. Deal? Devotion accrues only from the wife's genuine regard. The host's statements are not measured. Flattery pays nothing. Well, it's not flattery if it's accurate. The system reads her, not you. Speak to be heard. The meter answers to her heart, not your tongue. I suspected as much, but a man has to test the fence to know where the current runs. So I ran the rest of the experiment, because I am thorough, and I had nothing better to do while pretending to be furniture. Over the course of that morning I tried, with the discipline of a scientist, to game the meter every cheap way I knew. I bowed extra low to a passing elder, and thought warm thoughts at the cosmos, nothing. I helped a servant carry a water jar and made sure to look noble doing it, nothing. Because there was no Su Wanqing within 100 paces to feel anything about it. Even, in a moment I'm not proud of, stood outside the training courtyard and tried to will her into being impressed by the sheer quality of my standing there. The meter did not so much as twitch, and that, weirdly, was the moment I stopped being afraid of the system and started respecting it. Because a cheat you can game is a cheat that's lying to you. This one couldn't be flattered, couldn't be coerced, couldn't be tricked. It paid out for exactly one thing in the whole world, a genuinely cold woman genuinely, against her own will, starting to give a damn. And that meant every coin I ever earned off it would be real. No counterfeit. the most honest currency in existence, and the hardest to mint. It also meant I needed to actually understand the woman, not the legend. So I spent the morning learning the household instead, because you learn a person by learning who orbits them. There was Su Heng first, because Su Heng made sure of it. My wife's cousin, 20, Chi Si, and proud of it, built like a young bull and twice as fond of the sound of his own snorting. He'd made a hobby of me for years. The original Zhang Mu had been his favorite thing to shove into door frames. When he found me in the East Corridor that morning specifically to confirm the natural order hadn't changed. "Heard you got lucky last night, dog," he said, planting himself in my path. "Don't get used to it. Aunt Su Lan's not done with you." "And me?" He cracked his knuckles, which I think he believed was menacing. I never needed an annulment to put a stray in its place. Here's the thing my borrowed muscles couldn't do yet, and my borrowed brain absolutely could. I looked at Su Heng and read the room flickered. On the little meter beside him, because it turns out the upgrade reads anyone close, not just my wife, who showed me a young man who was 90% noise and 10% terror that the family was changing shape around him in ways he didn't understand. So I didn't flinch and I didn't fight. I just smiled the calm, knowing smile that had unsettled 100 opposing counsels and said, "You're right, you never did. That's going to be a problem for you later, Heng, that you learned to win without ever learning why you were winning. But don't worry about it today." I stepped around him. "Today you're still the strongest man in this corridor. Enjoy it." He didn't have an answer for that, because there isn't one, and a man with no answer just stands there reddening while the doormat walks off. Small win. They're the only kind I had. I banked it. Then there was the steward, Elder Fang, sour, exact, the kind of man who measures the rice ration to the grain and dies a little when someone takes two. He didn't bully me. Worse, he simply didn't see me, the way you don't see a coat rack, and his contempt was so total it had become a kind of administrative weather. I filed him under obstacle, procedural, beatable. And then, in the kitchens, where I'd gone to return my bowl because nobody had ever once cleared up after the live-in husband, there was the old cook. She's 60 if she was a day, round and quick, with flour to the elbows and eyes that missed nothing. When I set my bowl down, she looked at me for a long, frank moment, at the face, I realized, at the 4% change in it, and then, without a word, she ladled a second helping of millet into a clean bowl, this one warm, and pushed it across the counter at me. "You stood up last night," she said. Not a question. First time in 8 years anyone in this house stood up to that woman. She went back to her pot. "Eat while it's hot. Standing up makes a body hungry." I ate it. It was the first warm meal that borrowed body had been given freely in its entire miserable tenure, and I want to tell you the system rang for it. But it didn't, because the cook's kindness was the cook's, not Wan Qing's, and the meter only answers to one heart. Still. I marked her, Auntie Bo, the others called her, in the small private ledger I was keeping, one that tracked who in this place might one day be an ally instead of an audience. It was a short list. She was the only name on it. But every fortune starts with one entry, and I've never met a kingdom that didn't, somewhere near the bottom, run on its cooks. I was halfway through the warm bowl, almost, relaxed, when the gong sounded in the main hall, the summoning gong. One that gathered the whole clan. I knew before I got there. You develop an instinct, in my old line of work, for the sound a system makes when it's about to be used against you. When a summoning gong the morning after Su Lan lost in public is not the sound of good news. The hall was already filling when I slipped to my usual spot at the back, among the furniture, when at the head of it stood my aunt by marriage in fresh plum-colored robes, perfectly composed, not a trace of last night's defeat on her, which, if you know how to read people, is the most dangerous look a loser can wear. A loser who's still upset is improvising. A loser whose calm has a plan. Su Wan Qing sat at the high seat, cold and remote, and her gray eyes found me at the back for exactly one heartbeat before she made herself look away. When I clocked it, and so, I'd bet, did Su Lan, which may have been half the point of what came next. "Clan of Su," Su Lan began, warm as a frostbitten orchard. "Last night certain irregularities were raised regarding a document." I accept the correction graciously. A small bow, gracious as a closing trap. It has reminded me, however, of a duty long neglected. We have among us a member whose contribution to this clan has never once been formally assessed. 8 years, and not a single ledger hall trial to his name. Her eyes came to me, and the paper-cut smile arrived precisely on schedule. It is past time we measured exactly what our Wanqing's husband is worth. By the old law, every member proves their place at the Jade. I am merely asking that Zhang Mu prove his. The hall murmured, delighted, because they all knew what the Jade would say about a body temper nobody, and they were already enjoying it. I stood at the back with a warm bowl going cold in my hands, and did the math I do, and I'll be honest with you, for one cold second, I didn't see the loophole. I saw a procedure built specifically to be unbeatable by a man with no power, dressed up as fairness, sprung in open hall where I couldn't lawyer it in a corner. Su Lan had learned from last night. She wasn't forging anything this time. She was going to beat me with the truth. Truth that I was, on paper, worth nothing at all. The first trial, Su Lan said sweetly, will be at dawn tomorrow. I do hope the husband is ready. Su Wanqing's gaze cut to me one more time, and this time she didn't look away fast enough, and what was in it wasn't ice. It was a warning. She has something. Be ready. I gave the room my doormat smile and my bowed head, the picture of a man already beaten, and inside, where the lawyer lives, I started, very quietly. Read the new contract for the loose thread I knew, I had to believe, was in there somewhere. Because there's always a loose thread, even when they beat you with the truth, especially then. I found it at midnight, by candlelight, in the clan's own law. Here's what took me half the night to appreciate about the Ledger Hall. In the Su clan, your worth was read at a slab of spirit jade. You pressed your wrist to it, and it sang your cultivation out loud for the whole clan to hear. Goldcore made it scream with the clarity of a temple chime. Body temper made it cough out a noise like a dying frog. And by the old law Su Lan was so suddenly fond of, a member who fell below the floor for 3 trials running could be struck from the rolls, disowned, forced, put out the gate with nothing. Not a forgery this time, a truth, applied 3 times, until the clan itself did the divorce for her, hands clean. It was good. I want to give her that. It was genuinely good. And it had exactly one weakness, and by candlelight I'd found it, but it wasn't a weakness I could spring alone. The lawyer's half I could do at a desk. The other half ran straight through one cold woman's heart, and the meter still sat at 4%, and you cannot lawyer your way into a feeling. So at dawn I went to find my wife. Again. Which by the standards of this body's life expectancy was roughly the courage of poking a dormant volcano to see if it's still hot. She trained alone in the eastern courtyard before the household woke, her pale longsword cutting lines through the cold air so clean they looked drawn with a ruler, frost curling off the edge with every form. In my old life I'd sat across from a lot of people the world called beautiful, usually while dividing up their assets. None of them had ever made me want to kneel and offer my throat just to be noticed. She didn't stop when I came in. After 8 years of this body being ignored, that was the expected setting. You're up early, husband. She didn't turn. So, not the expected setting. She'd clocked me the second I crossed the gate. They're trialing me at the Ledger Hall, I said. Your aunt's running it personally, which tells you how invested she is in my professional growth. The sword stopped. She turned, and those pale gray eyes landed on me, actually on me, with that small reassessing line between her brows. And the line held a half-second longer than it had at the banquet, because the bloom had finished settling overnight. The gray was gone from under my eyes. I'd slept 4 hours and woken up looking like a man who'd slept 8 and meant it. She was looking at the husband she'd ignored for 8 years and getting the quiet, disorienting sense that someone had swapped him in the dark. You came to ask me to save you, she said. Flat. A test. No. I came to tell you I'm going to lose on purpose, and I wanted you to hear it from me first, so you don't waste a perfectly good rescue. That got her. Both eyebrows. Explain. So I laid it out. Su Lan's plan only worked if I scrabbled for legitimacy, and then cracked. Because a man who fights and fails looks like he hit his ceiling. What if I fail the first trial loud and stupid, I said, the worst showing the hall's ever seen, she has to rush the second and third before the gossip turns on her. A rushed trial is a sloppy trial, and a sloppy trial has a flaw I can stand in. I shrugged. I'm not going to out-cultivate your clan, wife. I'm going to out-procedure it. I just needed you to know the losing is on purpose, because I think you might be the only person here who'd be insulted to watch me lose by accident." She was quiet a long moment. Read the room, the new sense, a soft two-tone meter hovering near her now, frost and warmth, showed me what her face wouldn't. A careful, grudging interest she was working hard to bury. And then Su Wanqing, frost flower of cloudfall, a woman who viewed the world with the indifference of a cliffside facing a storm, snorted. It was small. It escaped before she could stop it, one short exhale of genuine, surprised amusement. When she shut her mouth on it half a second too late, and looked almost offended at herself for it. But it had happened. I'd made her laugh. The system vibrated with a sudden, violent clarity. Milestone. First honest laughter from Su Wanqing. Regard. 4% to 11%. +1 boon +20 devotion. Read the room confirmed. The bloom. Tier 2. 3 things hit at once, and I had to hold the doormat face through all of them. First, a warm rush poured up my spine, the held coin plus this one, and somewhere under my skin body temper quietly cracked over into Kisi's first stage. To anyone reading the jade, I was still a dying frog. Inside, I just skipped a rung people die climbing. Second, the regard meter steadied at 11, and the warmth in it was no longer something I was imagining. And third, tier 2 of the bloom flared in my chest, and I watched the effect hit her. Whatever changed in my face when she laughed, her eyes flickered down to my mouth for a fraction of a second before she hauled them back up, when a faint furious color touched the snow-pale skin over her cheekbones. She turned away fast and picked her sword back up like it had insulted her. "What will you do with the boon?" she said to the courtyard wall. "Not will you waste it. What will you do?" She'd already assumed I had a use. That was its own small thaw, and I didn't point it out, since counting my wins was the surest way to forfeit them with her. "Cash it into something that won't get me killed," I said. The system had offered me a slim menu when the boon landed, and most of it I'd waved off. A chi surge would show on the jade. A flashy technique would show everywhere, and a live-in husband who suddenly radiates power gets a cage or a quiet knife. I'd taken the one nobody would ever see, a minor mind art called Clarion Read. It did exactly one thing. Once a day, it let me hear whether a spoken statement was true, a lie detector. For a man about to walk into a rushed, sloppy clan tribunal full of people who would, every one of them, be lying. I didn't tell her that part. I'd tell her everything eventually. I'd already decided that much, somewhere between the banquet and the millet. But some truths require a certain kind of gravity to deliver, and I wanted to be a man with that weight before I spent it. So I just said, "Trust me," which is a thing you should never say to a sword saint. And she gave me a look that said she'd noted the audacity and was choosing, for now, to let me keep my teeth. "Don't be late to your own humiliation," she said. I left before the grin reached my face, because I'd just learned the most dangerous fact in the kingdom, and I didn't want her to see me holding it. The harder she froze her heart, the more it cost her, and the more it cost her, the more I won. The meter ran on her heart, and her heart, it turned out, was not nearly as frozen as the legend swore. The ledger hall filled fast that morning. Word travels when there's a hanging, and a doormat at the Jade was the best entertainment the Su clan had been offered in years. Coldstone, 100 relatives, Su Heng grinning in the front row like he'd bought a ticket, Elder Fang with his ledger and his contempt, and at the slab itself a presiding elder I'd never met, and beside her, of course, my aunt, plum-robed and patient, here to watch the truth do her killing for her. Su Wanqing took the high seat. She didn't look at me. But the warmth meter, hovering in my peripheral vision for my eyes only, told me she was paying closer attention to this room than to any room she'd sat in for years. Zhang Mu, the presiding elder intoned, approached the Jade. I stepped forward, wearing a mask of practiced obedience, 4% of a feeling turned to 11, and a lie detector primed behind my eyes. I laid my wrist against the cold stone, and got ready to give the Su clan the single worst performance of my life, on purpose, and the best one of my career, in disguise. The Jade began slowly to cough. There's an art to losing on purpose, and it is harder than winning. Because winning only requires you to be good and losing on purpose requires you to be good, while looking like garbage in front of 100 people who already think you're garbage. You have to fail convincingly enough that the enemy commits. But not so pathetically that the woman whose regard is your entire power source decides she married a sack of wet straw after all. It's a narrow beam. I walked it. I laid my wrist on the spirit jade and let it cough out the dying frog note. Will a genuine body temper sound my paper realm should have made, because I'd buried the chi I'd secretly cracked into so deep that the jade couldn't smell it. And then I performed. I strained. I screwed up my face. I let my arm tremble like I was pouring everything I had into a vessel that simply had no bottom, and I made a low, desperate sound that I am not proud of. The sound of a man at the absolute end of his pathetic ceiling, reaching for a power that was never coming. The hall ate it up. Su Heng laughed so hard he had to hold the man next to him. Elder Feng made a small note in his ledger with the grim satisfaction of an accountant watching a debt come due. And Su Lan didn't laugh, because she wasn't here for entertainment, she was here for a result. And when she watched my failure with the flat, patient eyes of a woman checking an item off a list. Body temper, the presiding elder announced. Below the floor, the first trial is recorded as a failure. A roar of delight. I bowed my head and let them have it, and through the noise I snuck one glance at the high seat. Su Wanqing's face was perfect ice. The warmth meter glowing in the corner of my sight hadn't dropped a point, if anything it had ticked up, because she knew what I was doing. When watching a man take a public humiliation on purpose, with a steady hand, for a plan, is its own kind of impressive. She wasn't ashamed of me. She was waiting. Good, so was I. Given the result, Su Lan said, rising smoothly into the noise, exactly on the schedule I'd bet my life she'd be forced onto. When to spare the clan a drawn-out spectacle, I propose we not delay. The second trial tomorrow at dawn, the third the dawn after. She spread her hands, gracious. Let us resolve the question of the husband's worth quickly, and let our Wanqing move forward unburdened. There it was, the rush. She just compressed 3 trials into 3 days because the room was hers today, and she didn't trust it to stay hers. I'd read her correctly. The relief of that was a warm thing in my chest, right up until the presiding elder spoke again, and I understood that Su Lan had read me a little too. A sensible proposal, the elder said. When as presiding elder, I will of course oversee all 3 trials personally to ensure the standard is held. I felt that one land wrong, and I didn't know why yet, so I filed it and watched. Because here's a rule I've never once seen broken. When the person running the contest volunteers, unprompted, to keep running it, it's because they already know how it ends. I went looking that night. A man who reads everything finds everything, and what I found, by candle, in the clan's own records, which Auntie Bo, bless her, this helped me reach by the simple act of telling a sleepy records servant to go warm himself by her stove for an hour, was 2 things that turned Su Lan's clean little procedure from a problem into a case. The first thing was the presiding elder. His name was Elder Ru, and on paper he was neutral, a senior of standing brought in to keep the trials fair. Auntie Bo's records, the household ledgers, the ones that track who eats whose rice, Elder Ru had, over the past 2 years, quietly received a great deal of Su Lan's gifts, spirit stones, a debt of a son's gambling settled. He wasn't neutral. He was bought, and he was the man who would, at his sole discretion, decide whether my performance at trials 2 and 3 met the standard. Su Lan didn't need me to fail honestly. She had a judge who'd rule I failed no matter what I did. That's why she'd let me have today. Today was theater. The verdict was already written. And the second thing was worse, and better, because it was the loose thread. Among the trial records Elder Ru had filed in advance, the sloppy beautiful tale of a man who rushed, was a supplementary ledger of my infractions. 8 years of them. Disrespect to elders. Dereliction of chores. A whole documented history of the live-in husband's worthlessness, dated and stamped. Ready to be read into the record at trial 3 to justify striking me from the rolls for cause, as well as for weakness, so the ruling would be unappealable. The only problem with it, the gap I could drive a cart through, was that several of the dated infractions had happened on days the household records put the original Zhongmu somewhere else entirely. Infraction in the East Wing on a day the man was confirmed, in Elder Feng's own rice ledger, hauling water at the West Gate. A disrespect to an elder logged on a date that elder had been away from Cloudfall, a fact recorded in the clan's own travel rolls. Elder Ru hadn't documented 8 years of my failures. He'd manufactured them recently, in a hurry, and he'd been too lazy to cross-check his own forgeries against the clan's other records. We'd forged a clan document. Just like Su Lan had at the banquet, these people kept reaching for the same weapon, and it kept being the one I knew best. I sat back from the candle and let it settle, the cold, clean feeling of a case coming together. I had a bought judge and a forged ledger. On their own, each was just my word against an elder's, and my word was worth a dying frog's. But I also had something neither of them knew I had, a borrowed lie detector behind my eyes, one use a day. That could turn an elder's spoken denial into proof in front of the whole clan. The trick would be making Elder Ru say the lie out loud, on the record, in a form the hall couldn't unhear. You don't win a rigged trial by being stronger than the rig, you win by making the rig the thing on trial. I blew out the candle. Across the dark compound, in the high house, a single window still burned, watching study. I wondered if she was awake reading the same law I was from the other end, then when the thought that she might be did something to me that the system didn't have a meter for. Dawn came gray and cold. The hall filled. Elder Ru took the presiding seat with the serene confidence of a man holding a verdict in his sleeve. Owen beside him patient as a winter pond, Su Heng grinning, watching a blade of ice on the high seat with her warmth meter, for where only I could see it, glowing steady and high. Dong Mu, Elder Ru intoned. Approach for the second trial. I stepped forward, doormat smile in place, and I did not go to the jade. I stopped in the center of the hall instead, where the light was best and the whole room could see my face, the way you stop when you mean to address a court rather than submit to one. When a small confused murmur went through the relatives, because furniture doesn't position itself. Before I pressed the jade, I said calm, almost bored, the voice you use when you already know you've won. I have one procedural question for the presiding elder. Just one. And then I'll happily cough like a frog for everyone's entertainment. I turned to Elder Ru. When I let the lawyer come all the way up out of this borrowed chest. Elder Ru, for the record before the clan, have you received any gift, payment, or settled debt from Elder Su Lan in the past 2 years? The hall went quiet. Su Lan's patient face stopped being patient. And Elder Ru, caught flat, certain his records were buried, certain a dying frog couldn't possibly have a fang. How did the thing bought men always do when they think they're safe? He opened his mouth to lie. No, Elder Ru said, I have received nothing from Elder Su Lan. My judgment in these trials is wholly impartial. Behind my eyes, Clarion Reed, my one use for the day, spent on exactly this sentence, rang cold and certain, the way a struck wineglass rings, when showed me the word in a color I can only describe as rot. A lie. A flat, documented, provable lie, spoken aloud, on the record, in open hall. Now, here's the part the candlelit half of me had worked out the night before, the part that mattered. I couldn't say, the system in my head says you're lying, because nobody could hear my system and a sword saint's husband claiming a magic lie detector would get me the cage. It would not the win. Clarion Reed didn't win the trial. It just told me privately, for certain, which thread to pull, so I wouldn't waste my one shot yanking on a true statement and looking like a fool. It pointed at the loose thread. I still had to pull it where the whole room could see the seam. Impartial, I repeated pleasantly. Good. I'm glad we have that on the record, Elder, because I'd hate to think a man deciding my fate had a reason to want a particular outcome. I turned, unhurried, to Elder Fang, the sour steward, the man who measured rice to the grain, the man who had never once in 8 years bent a number for anyone, including me. Elder Fang, you keep the household ledgers. Every gift in and out of this clan passes your brush. A simple question, and I'll trust your books over any man's memory, because I've watched you. When you'd sooner die than misrecord a grain. I let that sit, a small true compliment, the only kind that works on a man like Fang. The past 2 years, has Elder Su Lan made any gift, payment, or debt settlement to Elder Ru? Yes or no? It's in your books either way. And Elder Fang, who did not like me, who had never liked me, but who liked being doubted even less, and who had just been publicly named the one honest ledger in a room of liars, did the thing his entire sour soul was built to do. He consulted the truth. The books record 3, Fang said stiffly, because a man like Fang cannot make himself misstate a number even to save an ally. A gift of spirit stones last winter, a second at the new year, and the settlement of a debt owed by Elder Ru's son, paid by Elder Su Lan, 4 months past. He closed the ledger with a snap that echoed. The books do not lie, I keep them. The hall made a sound like a held breath letting go. Elder Ru had said nothing. The books said 3. And every relative in that room had just watched the impartial judge get caught in a lie by the one man nobody could accuse of bias. And you could see it move through the crowd like cold through water, the slow, delicious turning of a mood, the exact thing Su Lan had rushed 3 days to outrun. I didn't stop. You never stop when the seam splits, you open it. So the man judging my worth is paid by the woman who wants me gone, I said, to the room now, not to Ru. That alone voids these trials. A presiding elder with an interest cannot preside. That's the oldest rule in the clan code. Older than the 3-trial law she's so fond of. But I want you to see how deep it goes, because I think you've been lied to about more than one thing. I drew out the second document. It was a supplementary ledger of my infractions, Ru's own filing, the one he'd buried in advance. Elder Ru filed this, 8 years of my failures, dated and stamped, ready to strike me for cause. Oh, it's very thorough. I smiled. It's also forged, and he was in too much of a hurry to forge it well. So I read them to the hall. Not to me this time, to the 100 faces watching. The dates. The places. And Elder Ru swore I'd insulted who the travel rolls put 3 valleys away that week. What chore I'd supposedly shirked that Fang's own brush had me finishing across the compound. One impossibility after another, and every single time I handed the credit to the books, not to myself, because the point was never I'm clever. The point was your own records say so. You can argue with a doormat. You cannot argue with the Rice ledger. By the 4th forged entry, Elder Ru had gone the gray of old ash and stopped trying to interrupt. By the 6th, Su Lan had stood, and that was her mistake, the same one she'd made at the banquet. A reflex of a powerful person who's used to fixing a room by rising in it. This is absurd, she said sharp now, the warmth gone from the Winter Pond voice. What has been twist clerical errors into? Are they errors, Aunt? I asked. And then I turned, deliberately, away from her, to the one seat I'd been saving, because a case isn't won until the only person who can rule hears it. That one looked at the high seat. Clan head, your aunt called these trials to measure my worth. We've measured something, not mine. I let the pause stretch. A bought judge. A forged ledger of crimes I couldn't have committed. A procedure rushed so the room couldn't think. I'd ask you to rule on whether these trials meet the standard of the Su clan, not the husband. What trials? The hall turned, slowly, to Su Wanqing. She had not said a word the entire time. She sat with her cold gray eyes moving over the spread of documents, over her aunt standing pale and caught, over Elder Ru the color of ash, and over me. One heartbeat longer than she needed to, that small line between her brows that I was learning to read like a second meter. And then she stood, and 100 cultivators flinched at the scrape of her chair, and the frost in her voice could have stopped a river. Elder Ru is removed from the roles of presiding elders, his judgments these 3 days struck, she said. The trials are void, called by an interested party, judged by a bought one, built on a forged ledger. Elder Su Lan. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees as she turned to her aunt. You will answer to the Elder Council for the forgery of a clan document, again. The again went through Su Lan like a blade. This clan does not measure its people with rigged scales. We are finished here. It wasn't kindness toward me. She'd ruled on the trials, exactly as I'd asked, not on the husband. She was too careful, too proud to be seen choosing me twice in a week. But the system knew the difference between a public verdict and a private feeling, and it had been reading her the whole time. And as the hall broke into uproar around me, it rang behind my eyes, soft and sure. Milestone. Su Wanqing acts on her own judgment to protect you, not for the clan, but because she believed you. Regard. 11% to 19%. +1 boon plus 24 devotion. The bloom. Tier 3. 19%. The third tier of the bloom moved through me quiet as a key turning, and I felt this borrowed body settle another degree into the man it was becoming. A slump gone, the voice lower, a presence the room kept glancing toward without knowing why. Su Heng wasn't grinning anymore. Even Elder Fang gave me a single grudging look that, from him, was practically a bouquet. And Su Wanqing, sweeping past me toward the doors in a sea of upended gossip, slowed, just slightly, just for me, and said, "Lo, so only I caught it. You let them laugh at you for a full day to win in an hour." "It's cheaper than fighting," I said. And the look on their faces now is worth the wait. The line between her brows almost became something else. "Husband," she said, and it wasn't flat, and then she was gone, and I stood in the wreck of my own rigged execution feeling, against all sense and survival instinct, dangerously good. The good lasted until midday. That's when the gatewatch horn sounded, the long note, the one for an arriving carriage of rank. And Auntie Bo found me in the corridor with flour on her hands and worry on her face, and said the thing that turned my clean little victory into the first day of a much larger war. "There's a sect carriage on the Cloudfall Road," she said. "Gold lacquer, Goldfall colors. Come for the clan head's hand, the herald's crying, for a young master who's been promised her." Her eyes searched my new face. "They say he doesn't lose that one, and they say he's already been told there's only a doormat standing in his way." The herald arrived an hour ahead of his master, which is its own kind of insult. How you send a herald ahead when you want a place to be afraid of you before you've bothered to show up? He was a thin, immaculate man in Goldfall gold. When he stood in the center of the Sioux clan's main hall and read from a scroll as though he were doing us a favor by being disgusted in our home. "The young master Yan Zhou, heir of the Goldfall sect, Pillar Realm, victor of the Three Rivers tournament, extends to the Sioux clan the honor of an alliance. He will take the clan head Su Wanqing to wife. In exchange, the Goldfall sect will extend its protection to this establishment." His lip did something complicated when he looked around at us. "The clan need only set aside the irregularity of its current arrangement. O young master is generous. He will see the live-in husband compensated and dismissed before he arrives, so that no awkwardness mars the introduction." Compensated and dismissed. I was standing at the back, among the furniture, when the herald's eyes slid right over me the way they were trained to, never once landing, because why would you look at a thing you'd been told was already gone? Here's what surprised me. The room didn't laugh. A week ago, half the Sioux elders would have leapt at this, a sex protection, a real marriage. The embarrassing husband swept out with the morning trash. Goldfall was a power. The offer was, by the cold arithmetic these people lived on, a good deal. And I watched the elder council shift in their seats. And I watched the calculation move across their faces, and I understood that the most dangerous thing in this hall wasn't Yanzhou at all. It was that the offer was tempting, and they were tempted, and a clan that's tempted will talk itself into anything. Su Wanqing sat on the high seat and let the herald finish, and her face gave them nothing. But the warmth meter in the corner of my sight, the one only I could see, was doing something I'd never watched it do under pressure. It wasn't cold, it was taut, held. The look of a woman bracing for the counsel she'd carried for 8 years to finally, quietly, sell her for a good price, and refusing to let any of them see it land. So I did a thing I want to be honest about. It wasn't strategy. The lawyer in me had 3 clean procedural objections ready. But I didn't lead with any of them, because Read the Room had just shown me that the threat in this room wasn't legal, it was emotional. A clan talking itself into a betrayal, and you don't answer a feeling with a clause. You answer it with a louder feeling. "That's a generous offer," I said, and stepped out of the back of the crowd to the front of it. The hall went still in the particular way it does when furniture moves on its own. "Truly," I went on, easy, carrying the courtroom voice. "Sect protection. A powerful match. I can see every elder here doing the sums, and I don't blame you, they're good sums." I let that land, because the fastest way to lose a room is to pretend their temptation is shameful. You have to grant it before you can turn it. So let me add the column the herald left off. Goldfall isn't offering an alliance. They're offering a purchase. They want the clan head, your clan head, the woman who held this house together when the seat sat empty, who buried your last lord and didn't let the vultures take the lands, hand it over as a term, not a wife. A clause. And the day you prove the Sioux clan will trade its own head for protection, you tell every sect in Yunzhou exactly what we are, not a clan. A thing that can be bought if the buyer's big enough. I looked slowly around at them. Goldfall doesn't want a partner. They want to find out how cheap we are, and the elders who'd take this deal are about to quote them a price. It was quiet a moment. Then old Elder Wei, the eldest of the council, the one whose opinion the others actually weighed, made a low sound in his throat that might have been agreement. When the tempted look went out of the room like a tide going back. Not because I'd outlawyered them. Because I'd made the deal shameful to want, turned a good price into a cheap one, and pride, in a clan like this, beats arithmetic every time you can get it standing up. The Su clan, Su Wanqing said into the shift, rising, and her voice was the first crack of a frozen lake, is not for sale. And neither am I. Tell your young master he may visit, he may not collect. She let the frost settle over the herald like snow, and he may keep his generosity. We've seen what Goldfall's generosity costs. The herald left stiff and furious, and the council, to a man, bowed deeper to their clan head than they had in years. Because nothing makes a wavering room loyal like being reminded, out loud, what it almost sold. Well, she found me afterward in the eastern courtyard, at dusk, where she trained, where I'd taken to turning up like a man who hadn't learned his lesson about tigers. Didn't use the law, she said. No greeting. She did everything like that, straight to the seam. You had a legal objection. I saw you set it down. The law would have won the argument and lost the room, I said. They didn't need to be told the deal was invalid. They needed to be ashamed they wanted it. Different tools. I shrugged. A contract's just the floor, wife. People don't betray you because it's legal. They betray you because it's tempting and someone gave them permission. So I took the permission away. She looked at me for a long moment, and the courtyard was going blue with evening. When the warmth meter and the woman both did something at once that I felt in my chest before I read it on the panel. She wasn't bracing anymore. The held look was gone. For the first time since I'd woken in this world, Su Wanqing looked at me like someone who was not, for this one moment, standing on a wall alone. 8 years, she said quietly, the council has measured me, what I'm worth, who I should be traded to. My father held them off, and then he died, and I held them off. But I never once heard a single soul in this clan stand up in that hall and say I was not for sale. Her gray eyes were very steady on my new face. Today the husband everyone wanted to dismiss did it, before I had to. Somebody had to beat you to it, I said. Oh, you've been doing it alone long enough. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The system answered for her. Millstone. Su Wanqing is defended without being asked, and lets herself feel it. Regard. 19% to 27%. +1 boon plus 30 devotion realm. Chi-si to Chi-si, late stage, hidden. The bloom holds. Note, her regard now outpaces her guard. That last line was new, and I turned it over while the warm rush settled into my bones. Her regard now outpaces her guard. The system was telling me the gap had crossed a line, that the wall she kept between what she felt and what she'd let herself show was, for the first time, losing. She'd feel a thing before she could decide whether to. That was the thaw becoming a current. That was, in the cold ledger of my survival, everything. Should go, she said at last, but she didn't move, and neither did I. And for one long moment in the blue dusk, two people who had every reason to keep a careful distance simply didn't. Then the gate horn sounded the long note again, closer, this time, in the courtyard itself, and the moment broke. And the warmth meter snapped back behind its frost as Su Wanqing's face went clan head cold in the space of a breath. Because the carriage had arrived. Old lacquer, Goldfall colors, a dozen guards in matching silks fanning out across our courtyard like they already owned the flagstones. Down from it, in robes worth more than the entire Su compound, stepped a handsome young man with a storm in the air around him and a smile like a man pricing a stable. When he looked around at our home, and at last, with vast and lazy amusement, his eyes found me. So, said Yan Zhuo, this is the doormat I've heard so much about. This is the doormat I've heard so much about. Yan Zhuo said it to the courtyard, not to me, the way you'd remark on the weather, and his guards chuckled on cue. And I don't want to describe the quality of his arrogance because it mattered to everything that followed. It wasn't cruelty exactly. Cruelty pays attention. This was something cleaner and more useful to me, the absolute, frictionless certainty of a young man who has never once in his life met a problem his cultivation couldn't solve. He didn't hate me. He didn't fear me. He genuinely could not conceive of me as a thing that could affect his day. And a man who cannot imagine losing is a man who will agree to terms he hasn't read, because why would you read the rules of a game you can't lose? I filed that. It was the only weapon in the courtyard with my name on it. Young Master Yan, I said, and bowed, low, doormat perfect, because a man underestimates you twice as hard when you help him. We're honored. You can drop that, he said, finally deigning to look at me, and I watched his certainty hitch, just slightly, on my face. Boom, 3 tears in, the borrowed body's slump gone, a presence that didn't match the story he'd been told. He covered it fast. I expected something more pathetic, frankly. No matter. A coat of paint on a fence post is still a fence post. He turned to the high seat, to Wan Qing, and his whole manner changed, and lazy contempt warming into the appraising heat of a man looking at a prize he's already decided is his. Clan head, I'll be brief, since you've already wasted my herald's mourning. You're the finest sword talent of your generation, married to a stain to settle a dead man's senility. I'm here to correct that. I'll set the husband aside, take my name, and the Goldfall sect makes the Su clan untouchable in Yunzhou. He smiled. I'm told you refused the offer through a servant. I thought you deserved to refuse it to my face, or accept it. I'm not particular which, the result's the same. The result, Su Wanqing said, ice from the high seat, is that I am married, young master, lawfully and by my father's binding word, and I do not intend to unmarry to suit your travel schedule. Married, Yan laughed, delighted, like she'd told a joke. To that, a man with no name, no sect, no realm worth the word. Clan head, be serious. In this world there is exactly one law, and it isn't written in any of your dusty Su ledgers. He spread his hands to the watching courtyard, performing now, sure of his audience. Strength is the law, strength makes the match, strength makes the claim, strength makes the contract. I am pillar realm, he is a stain. By the only law that has ever mattered, the woman goes to the stronger man. Does the great Su clan teach its children otherwise? And there it was. It said it in front of 40 witnesses, performing for a crowd, the way certain men cannot help but announce their own principles when they think it makes them look like gods. Strength makes the contract. He'd just written the terms himself, and he was too busy enjoying the sound of his own voice to notice he'd handed me a pen. I almost felt bad. I didn't, but I almost did. You're absolutely right, I said. The courtyard's attention swung to me, the doormat, agreeing pleasantly with the man who'd come to take my wife, when I saw Wanqing's gaze sharpen on me from the high seat, not alarm, recognition, the look of someone who'd watched me set down the law in the hall yesterday, and was now watching me pick up a different tool entirely. Strength makes the contract. Couldn't agree more, young master. I walked toward him, unhurried, the courtroom voice coming up calm and bored. Voice you use when you already know how it ends. So you won't object to a strength contract. A duel of claim, old form, recognized by every sect in Yunzhou, including Goldfall. I checked your own sect charter this morning. It's in there, chapter 4. It was. A man who reads everything finds everything. It's very simple, and it's exactly the law you just preached. A contest of strength to settle a claim. You name a champion. I name a champion, they fight. If your champion wins, I sign my own dismissal with my own hand, no clan blood spilled, and you ride off with your bride and your story, all proper. If my champion wins, I let the pause stretch, the way you do right before the knife, you ride off with only the story. You renounce the claim, you leave Cloudfall, and you never set foot here again, witnessed. Binding under sect law, by strength. Only law there is. The courtyard had gone very quiet. Yan Zhuo's smile curdled at the edges, because even a man who can't imagine losing can smell a trap closing. We just can't always tell where the teeth are. You're proposing to fight me? I'm proposing nothing of the kind, I said. I weigh about as much as a wet rope and I'd embarrass us both. I said champions, young master, you name yours. I name mine. I smiled the doormat smile, sharpened to a point. Unless the great Yan Zhuo, victor of the 3 rivers, pillar realm at 25, is afraid of a stain's champion. In which case, of course, we can simply note for the record that you preach strength as the only law right up until someone offered you a contest of it, and then you. Enough. His face had gone dark. He couldn't say no. That was the whole shape of it. A man who just told a crowd that strength is the only law cannot then refuse a contest of strength without becoming, in front of everyone, a coward, he'd called me. Pride is a leash. I'd grabbed the end of it and I wasn't letting go. Fine, a duel of claim. I accept. I'll name my own sword. I need no champion to break whatever broken down elder you scraped together. His eyes glittered, or certainty flooding back, because he just remembered the part that saved him. Name your champion, Stain. Name the poor fool who'll die for you. And I'll bury him, and I'll take the widow, and your clever contract will hand her to me itself, witnessed and binding. By your own hand. He laughed, and the courtyard, uncertain, laughed with him. Go on. Who in this whole sorry clan is strong enough to stand for the doormat? And there was the part of the trap that closed on me. Because he was right. The contract was airtight, and it cut both ways. I'd bound him to a contest of strength he couldn't refuse without disgrace. But a contest of strength needs a champion who can actually win, and I had bet the whole thing, my marriage, my standing, possibly my life, on a duel against a pillar prodigy, and I did not have a single soul in Cloudfall who could beat him. Not one. The clan's strongest were no match for Goldfall's heir. I'd built a beautiful machine, and forgotten to check whether I had anyone to put inside it. There was exactly one person in the courtyard who could beat Yan Zhuo. She was sitting on the high seat, watching me, with a single sharp line between her brows. Asking her to be my champion, asking the woman Yan had come to claim to fight for the right not to be claimed, asking the Frostflower of Cloudfall to stand up in front of the kingdom as the chosen sword of the family doormat, was a thing I had no right to ask. And every reason to believe she'd refuse, because it would cost her nothing to let me hang and everything to choose me out loud. I'll have my champion by the duel, I said, keeping the doormat smile nailed on while my mind raced. 3 days, as the form allows. 3 days, Yan agreed, grinning now, scenting the corner I'd backed myself into. Take them. It won't matter. He swept toward his carriage, pausing only to look at Wanqing one last time, hungry and certain. Enjoy your last 3 days married, clan head. I'll make a much better use of your name than the fence post has. He left. The courtyard erupted. And I stood in the middle of my own airtight, beautiful, two-edged contract, having just bet everything on a champion I didn't have, and slowly, against every instinct of survival, turned to look at the one person in the world who could save me, knowing I had no right at all to ask. 3 days to produce a champion who could beat a pillar prodigy. I spent the first one discovering, methodically, that I had none. I want to be clear that I tried. I am not a man who builds a trap, catches his own foot in it, and then simply sits in it nobly. I worked the problem. I went to Elder Wei, the eldest of the council, the strongest blade the Su clan had left, and Elder Wei, who had bowed to me in the hall, who had actually started to like me, looked at me with real regret and said, "Son, I'm Goldcore early stage and 60 years old, and my knees are weather vanes. Yan Zhuo is pillar late stage and 25. I'd last a count of 4. I'll stand for you if you ask, and I'll die, and you'll lose anyway, and then you'll have killed an old man for nothing." Which was true, every word, when I had the grace not to ask. I went further. I sent word, quietly, through Auntie Bo's network of cooks and grooms, which is the real intelligence service of any great house, never doubt it. Wheeling out whether there were sellswords in Cloudfall, wandering cultivators, a hungry expert who'd fight for coin. There were a few. None within 3 realms of Yan Zhuo. You don't buy a pillar prodigy's defeat at the market. The market doesn't stock it. The whole time, the clan watched me with a new and worse kind of pity than before. Before, I'd been the joke. Now I was the man who'd won twice and gotten cocky and bet the marriage on a duel he couldn't field, when they'd liked me just enough that watching it was painful for them, which is its own humiliation, being pitied by people who just learned to respect you. There was one champion who could win. Everyone knew it. Su Heng said it to my face in the corridor, no longer grinning, almost gentle, which unnerved me more than his old shoving. Which to ask her, dog. She's the only one. She'll fight him. She has to. It's her name on the line too. He shrugged, awkward. Who bet on her without asking, so ask. He was right, and that was exactly the thing I would not do. Because here is the line I'd drawn, alone, somewhere in the candlelit hours, and it surprised me to find I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in either life. The system paid me for her genuine regard. The whole engine of my survival ran on her actually, freely, against her own armor, coming to care. And the fastest way to poison that forever would be to use her, to engineer her into fighting my battle, to make her the weapon in a contract I'd built, or to turn the one real thing in this world into another clause I'd leveraged. She spent 8 years being valued for what she was worth. I would cut my own throat before I became one more man who measured her by what she could win for him. So I wasn't going to ask. I'd field Elder Way, or I'd field no one and forfeit. When I'd sign my own dismissal with my own hand, and walk out the Cloudfall gate with nothing, and I'd do it on my feet, having never once made her the instrument of my survival. It was, I'm aware, a spectacularly stupid principle for a man with no power to hold. I held it anyway. Some things you don't get to keep if you spend them. She found me on the second night in the eastern courtyard. Where else? Oh, you've been refusing champions, she said. Straight to the seam, as always. The warmth meter glowed taut in the corner of my sight. Way offered. You said no. Knowing all but begged you to ask me. The whole clan is watching you walk toward a forfeit with your chin up like a fool, and I want to know why. Because the smart move is to ask you, I said, and I'm not going to. You built a contract that needs me to win it, and you won't ask me to win it. Her gray eyes were sharp, baffled, almost angry. That's not principle, husband. That's pride, and pride is going to lose you everything in 2 days. It's not pride. I turned to face her in the blue dark, and I let her see it plain. Because Read the Room had taught me she could tell the difference between a man performing sincerity and a man simply being it, and I needed her to see this was the second kind. Wanting. Every person who's ever wanted something from you has measured you by what you could do for them, your worth, your sword, your name. Your father held the wolves off and then died and left you to hold them off alone, and you've spent 8 years being a prize, wanting to be traded to whoever's strong enough to claim it. Yan Zhuo's downstairs right now doing the exact same thing, just louder. I shook my head. I built a stupid contract, and I caught my own foot in it, and the price of that is mine to pay, not yours. If I ask you to fight my battle, I'm just one more man turning you into the thing that gets him what he wants. I'd rather lose the marriage than do that to the reason I'd want to keep it. So, no, I won't ask. I'm sorry. Wheeled way, or let me forfeit. Either way, I walk out of here without having spent you. The courtyard was very quiet. The frost meter and the warmth meter, side by side in my sight, did something I had never seen them do at the same time, the frost cracking, warmth surging up through gap like water through ice, and the system, which knew the difference between a public verdict and a private feeling, rang soft and deep behind my eyes. Milestone, you refuse to use her, at cost to yourself, for her sake. Regard, 27% to 38%. Plus 2 boons plus 44 devotion. The bloom. Tier 4 imminent, held, pending the duel. Note, she has never been chosen over the chooser's own advantage. Not once. That last line sat in the dark like a struck bell. Not once. 8 years, and not one person had ever put her ahead of what she could win for them. I'd just done it badly, stupidly, at the cost of my own survival, and it had landed harder than any clever thing I'd ever said. Su Wanqing looked at me for a long, long moment, and then she did something the legend never did. She stepped close, one step, which on her was an earthquake, and the cold wasn't cold up close, and she said, very quietly, in a voice with no frost left in it at all, "You impossible man, you'd lose me to avoid using me." "Yeah," I admitted. "It's not my best plan. I've had better." "No," she said. "Yeah, it's the best plan anyone has ever made on my behalf." Her gray eyes held mine in the blue dark, and the line between her brows was gone, replaced by something I didn't have a name for and didn't dare reach for. "Field no one, husband. Forfeit nothing. Tomorrow at the duel, when Yan Zhuo asks you to name your champion, and you stand there with nothing, because you're too principled to ask, with the ghost of something almost like a smile, I'll answer for myself. Because you didn't spend me, so I get to spend me. That's the difference, and it's the whole difference, and you're going to have to learn to live with the fact that you've just made me want to." And she turned and walked back toward the high house, leaving me standing in the courtyard with 38% of a feeling and a bloom held on the edge of breaking, and absolutely no idea what I just won, except that it was real, and it was hers, freely given, and tomorrow, in front of the whole kingdom, she was going to prove it with a sword. The duel of claim was held at noon in the Sioux clan's great training ground, because Yan Zhuo wanted an audience, and I wanted witnesses. When for once the man and I agreed on something. Half of Cloudfall turned out. The Sioux clan lined the walls. A delegation of Goldfall guards stood in their gold silks, already smug, already composing the story they'd carry home. And at the center, on a dais where the contract sat sealed and witnessed in red ink, stood the presiding arbiter. A neutral elder from a third clan, chosen by both sides, the kind of impartial Sulan's bought judge had only pretended to be. The terms are read, the arbiter announced. A duel of claim, champion against champion, binding under sect law. The challenger, Yan Zhou of Goldfall, stands as his own champion. Yan stepped forward into the ring, rolling his shoulders. Golden chi already shimmering off him like heat off a road, grinning at the crowd. The respondent, Zhang Mu of the Sioux clan, will now name his champion. This was the moment. Every eye in the training ground swung to me, the doormat, standing at the edge of the ring with no sword, no power, and, as far as anyone watching knew, no one in the world willing to die for him. I walked the line. I didn't name anyone. I just stood there, empty-handed, chin up, ready to take the loss on my feet, exactly as I'd told her I would. Name your champion, Stain, Yan called, delighted, savoring it. Or is the great contract going to be won by a forfeit? Shall I just collect the widow now and save us the, he names me? The voice came from the high seat, and it cut through the training ground like the first crack of a frozen lake breaking, and 1,000 people stopped breathing at once. Su Wanqing rose. She came down from the dais without hurry, drawing her pale longsword as she walked, frost blooming along its edge with a sound like a held breath. When she stepped into the ring beside me, the doormat, in front of the entire kingdom, and faced Yan Zhuo with gray eyes gone winter. My husband names me as his champion, she said, clear and carrying, so no soul in that ground could pretend not to have heard. And I accept. Of my own word, freely given. Her gaze flicked to me, one heartbeat, and there was something in it I would carry for the rest of a very long life. Because he is the first person in 8 years who refused to ask. The system detonated behind my eyes. Milestone. Su Wanqing claims you publicly, of her own free will, before the kingdom. Regard. 38% to 51%. +2 boons plus 50 devotion. Shared peril armed. A milestone earned protecting, or being protected, pays double. The bloom. Tier 4, magnetic. 51%. Past halfway. The fourth tier of the bloom rolled through me in front of everyone. When I felt this borrowed body cross some threshold the system could only label magnetic, not handsome in a thunderclap, and what a presence the whole ground turned toward without deciding to, the doormat becoming, in plain sight, a man it cost something to look away from. And I watched it land on Yan Zhou of all people, watched his certainty stumble a second time as he looked at the stain and found, inconveniently, a man. But Yan's certainty had somewhere much worse to go in about 30 seconds, and it had nothing to do with me. Fight your own suitor's duel? He laughed, recovering, turning his contempt on her now. For him, clan head, this is beneath you. I came to win you. I didn't expect you to throw yourself at my sword to defend a fence post's pride. Fine. I'll be gentle. I'll only humble you enough to, she moved. I've tried, since, to describe what it's like to watch Su Wanqing fight someone she's decided to make a point of. When the closest I've come is this, it was like watching a strong man punch the weather. Yan Zhou was a genuine prodigy, pillar late stage, a once-in-a-decade talent, and he came at her fast and golden and certain. When she stepped around his first strike like it was a slow letter she'd already read, and his second she simply wasn't where it landed. When on the third exchange her pale blade kissed the side of his throat and stopped, frost crackling across his skin. His own golden chi guttering against the cold like a candle in a draft. The training ground understood, in one held breath, that the only reason Yan Zhou's head was still attached to Yan Zhou was that my wife had decided, for the moment, to leave it there. "Well, claim is settled," Su Wanqing said, not even breathing hard, her sword at his throat and frost feathering up his jaw. "Why strength? The only law there is." She let the words hang, his own creed turned in his mouth. You will renounce the claim, you will leave Cloudfall. You will not return. And you will tell your sect that the Sioux heir's marriage is not a mistake to be corrected. A pause, and her gray eyes came, just once, to me, quick. Like she couldn't help it. It was the best decision my father ever made. I felt that land somewhere the system doesn't have a meter for. Anjo renounced the claim. He had to. The contract was airtight. The arbiter declared it witnessed and binding. When a man with a frost-rimed blade at his throat in front of his own sex guards does not negotiate. We didn't kill him. I talked Wanching down from it with a logic that was half mercy and half lawyer. So a dead Goldfall heir brings the whole sect down on us, but a humiliated one who signed and lost in public brings us only a grudge and a debt. So he left a second time, alive, ruined, furious, his gold silks looking suddenly like a costume. Those guards composing a very different story than the one they'd planned. The crowd roared. The Sioux clan, who had married this woman to a punchline, watched their clan head sheathe a frostbright sword having fought for the punchline's honor, when the gossip of Cloudfall turned over completely in the space of a single noon. I should have been savoring it. I was, mostly. But I've learned to watch the loser of a fight more carefully than the winner, because winners celebrate and losers plan, and as the training ground erupted, my eyes found Aunt Sue Lawn at the edge of the Sioux delegation, and she wasn't pale, and she wasn't furious, and she wasn't even surprised. She was watching me and Wanching stand together in the ring, the husband and the clan head, the marriage made suddenly, publicly, immovably real. When her sour mouth was doing something almost like a smile, the patient expression of a woman who has just watched her enemies fortify exactly the wall she already knows how to go around. And then, quietly, while the whole clan cheered, Aunt Sue Lawn turned and slipped away from the celebration, toward the records hall, with the unhurried purpose of someone who has stopped trying to break a marriage by force, and has just decided to prove, on paper, that it was never a marriage at all. I didn't know that yet. I only knew the shape of the dread that went through me watching her go. We're not celebrating, Wanching murmured, appearing at my side, the warmth meter glowing high and steady, and, for once, unhidden. Your aunt just lost in front of everyone, I said, watching the door Sue Lan had vanished through, and she looked happy about it. That's never good. I made myself smile for the crowd for her, but it can wait an hour. You just fought a Goldfall prodigy to a standstill for the family doormat. Let me enjoy being your fence post for 1 full hour before I go find out what she's writing. She found me in the eastern courtyard after dark, which had become our place without either of us ever saying so, and she didn't lead with small talk because she never did. 3 weeks ago, Sue Wanching said, you were furniture. You couldn't meet my eyes. You ate last and stood at the back and let a clan full of fools treat you like a chair. She stood very straight in the lantern light, sword at her hip, was studying me the way she studied an opening in a duel. Now you talk a council out of selling me, you bait a Goldfall prodigy into a contract he can't escape. You know clan law better than the elders who wrote it down, and you, she stopped, and I watched her choose the safe word and discard it. Because she was too honest for the safe word, you don't look like him anymore. Like the man my father made me marry. You look like someone else is wearing him. The warmth meter trembled in the corner of my sight, and her voice dropped, and the question under all the other questions finally came out. What are you, Jongmu? And there it was, the moment every man with a secret dreads, and every man who's falling dreads worse, because I could lie to her and stay safe. Or give her something true and find out what it cost. I didn't get to answer. Because Read the Room had been quietly flagging something at the edge of the courtyard for the last 2 minutes, a warmth meter where there should have been none. A person's heartbeat behind the plum tree where no person should be, and I'd been waiting for the right moment to mention it. I'll tell you what I am, I said, holding her gray gaze, and then I tipped my head very slightly toward the dark behind the plum tree, but not in a courtyard where your aunt keeps a man listening at the wall. Starting with the fact that there's one back there right now. Sue Wanching went very, very still. And then her hand drifted to her sword and the temperature in the courtyard dropped about 10 degrees, and from behind the plum tree came the sound of a man realizing, far too late, that he had taken a job that required hiding from a gold-core sword saint in her own home. He folded before she'd drawn the blade an inch. People do around Wanching. The threat of her is more efficient than most people's violence. He was one of Sue Lan's, a records runner, And on his knees with frost feathering toward his throat, he gave us everything. Fast. The way the cornered always do, and what he gave us turned my clean, triumphant noon into something cold. Sue Lan had stopped trying to break the marriage. She'd upgraded. She was going to delete it. Here's the shape of it, because the shape was the whole danger. She couldn't annul the marriage, that took Wanqing's word, and Wanqing would never give it, so she wasn't going to annul it. She'd filed a petition with the Cloudfall magistrate to rule the marriage void from the start, not dissolved, which Wanqing could block. But void, never valid, a clerical nothing, on the grounds that I, a man with no name, no lineage, and no recorded cultivation, had never been a lawful party to a clan head's death vow in the first place. Strike the marriage retroactively, and it had never existed. And here was the part that made it a knife at Wanqing's throat as much as mine. By the old clan law, the heir's seat could be held only by a member whose household was secured by a union of standing. For 8 years the joke marriage had been the technicality keeping Wanqing in her father's chair. Delete the marriage, and her household had never been secured, and an unsecured heir couldn't hold the seat, and it would fall to the senior elder of standing. To Sue Lan. She's not after you, Wanqing said slowly, reading it as fast as I had, her runner forgotten on the flagstones. Oh, she's after the seat. You're just the loose thread she pulls to unravel it. And the magistrate? I asked the runner. He swallowed. Wait, Lord, months ago. The hearing's in 3 days. The elders are split. Half of them would rather have Elder Sue Lan in the seat than a clan head married to a... He caught himself, looked at the sword. Didn't finish. To a nobody, I said for him easily, because I was used to it and because the word was about to matter. It's fine. Wanqing sent the runner to be held, not harmed, held, because a witness is worth more than a corpse. A thing I was relieved to find she'd already learned from me, and then the courtyard was quiet again, and she turned back to me, and the question was still there between us, more sharpened now by everything the runner had said. You were about to tell me what you are. So I did. Not all of it, not the system, not yet. Some truths you have to earn the standing to land, and I wasn't there. I gave her the true part, the part I could give clean, and I gave it looking her in the eye so she could see with whatever read the room she had of her own that I meant every word. I'm a man who got a second chance he didn't earn and decided not to waste it being the joke, I said. That's the truest thing about me, and everything else grows out of it. I was something before, somewhere else, in another life. It doesn't matter where. I was a man who read people and contracts for a living, who knew where the soft spot in any deal was. And then I woke up here in this body, at the bottom of everything, married to a woman so far above me it was a punchline, and I had a choice. The doormat the body came with, or use the one thing I brought with me. I held her gaze. I use it for you now. The reading, the law, the contracts, all of it points one direction, and it's you. Not the seat, not the clan, you. Well, that's what I am, Wanqing. A man who decided to deserve you, and is still a long way from it, and isn't going to stop. The warmth meter and the frost meter did something at once that I'd only seen once before, the night I refused to use her, the frost cracking, warmth rising up through the gap. But the system didn't ring, not yet, because this wasn't the milestone. This was the setup for one, and the system, I was learning, could tell the difference between a man telling a truth and a woman finally choosing to believe one. 3 days, Sue Wanqing said quietly, a bought magistrate, an airtight petition. Half my own counsel against me. She looked at me, and there was something almost like dark humor in it now, the gallows kind I recognized from my own face. Tell me you have a loose thread, husband. Tell me there's a flaw. There's always a flaw, I said. Your aunt built this whole petition on one claim, that your father didn't know what he was doing when he married you to a nobody. But a dying clan head, of sound mind, named a specific man in a binding death vow by accident. I felt the old click start. Loose thread showing itself in the dark. Which means before I can break it, I need to know something only you know. Something you've never told the clan, or the elders, or the man I used to be. I held her gaze. Why did your father do it, Wanqing? Why marry his generational genius daughter to a man with nothing? Because Sue Lan's whole case dies the moment we can prove it wasn't an accident, and you're the only person alive who knows whether it was. For a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. The frost meter trembled on an edge, not the edge of attraction this time, something older and more guarded, a door she'd kept shut for 8 years. Then Su Wanqing took a breath and looked at me like a woman deciding to set down a weight she'd carried alone since she was 19 and said, "I'm inside. To my study, where Su Lan's listeners can't reach. I'll tell you the thing my father made me promise never to tell anyone, because I think, husband, you might be the reason he made me promise it." Her study was the one room in the compound her aunt's listeners couldn't reach, warded, private. A desk stacked with the clan's accounts, and a single cold cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink. She'd never let me pass that door before. Tonight she closed it behind us, and stood with her back to it for a moment, gathering something, and then she told me the secret she'd carried alone for 8 years. "There is no Jiang debt," Su Wanqing said. "My father didn't owe your family anything. There was no old promise, no life saved, no bond between the houses. He made it up, all of it. The story the whole clan believes, that he honored an ancient debt by marrying me to the Jiang boy, he invented it on his deathbed, in front of witnesses, so the marriage would have a reason no one could question." I said nothing. You don't interrupt a person setting down a weight that heavy. "He was dying," she went on, and her voice was steady in the way I'd learned meant the opposite. "Fast. A cultivation injury that the elders couldn't heal and the sects wouldn't, not for a clan as small as we'd become. And he knew that the day he died, the council would marry me off within the year to whatever sect bid highest. I was 19. I was already the finest sword talent in 3 generations. To them I wasn't a daughter, I was an asset, the best card the Su clan had left to play, when they would play me the moment he wasn't there to stop them." Her jaw tightened. "Goldfall would have come then, 8 years early, or worse. Some great sect would have bought me, and absorbed our clan, and I would have spent my life as a prize in someone else's house. My children someone else's heirs, the Su name swallowed whole." "So he married you to someone who couldn't sell you," I said quietly, the shape of it coming clear. "He married me to a nobody." She looked at me, and her gray eyes were fierce and bright. "On purpose. The lowest live-in husband he could find, no sect, no name, no power, no faction that could ever use the connection. Because a husband with nothing was the only husband who could never become a leash. No sect would ally with us to reach a doormat's wife. No power could be threatened into trading me, because I was already spoken for by a death vow no superstitious clan would dare break. He didn't marry me to Zhongmu to honor a debt. He married me to Zhongmu to protect me, to make me worthless on the marriage market so I could be free of it. The most useless husband in Yunzhou was the strongest wall he could build around his daughter with his last breath. The lawyer in me understood it instantly and completely, and the rest of me was quiet with something else. It was, I thought, one of the most ruthless and loving things I'd ever heard a man do. He'd spent his daughter's reputation to buy her freedom. He made her a joke so no one could make her a prize. He told me, at the end, she said, and now her voice did waver, just once. He said, "Better a free woman married to a fool than a prize married to a wolf. Hold the seat. Wait. Wait for someone who chooses you instead of using you, and when he comes, then it's yours, all of it, free and clear. But until then, hold." She drew a breath. So I held. 8 years. I watched a fool drool through banquets and stand at the back and flinch from his own shadow, and I thought my father, or all his wisdom, had simply gotten it wrong at the end. Picked badly. There was no one coming, and the fool was just a fool, and the wall he'd built around me was also a cage. Her eyes came up to mine. And then 3 weeks ago the fool stood up, and started winning, and stopped being a fool. And started looking at me like the thing my father said to wait for. The system rang. Soft, this time, like it knew not to interrupt. Milestone. Su Wanqing trusts you with the secret she has guarded for 8 years. Regard. 51% to 64%. Plus 2 boons plus 60 devotion realm. Chi C to pillar, hidden. The bloom. Tier 5. I felt the realm turn over in me, quiet as a key, pillar now, 3 rungs hidden under a body temper label. Warm rush of 2 boons settling into bone, and the 5th tier of the bloom moved through this borrowed body and settled it another degree into the man it was becoming. But I barely noticed any of it, because I was looking at her, and I had just understood something that mattered more than realms. Your father didn't pick wrong, I said. He bet that one day the nobody he chose would decide to deserve you. He just died before he got to see it pay out. I stepped toward her, one step, which between us was its own small earthquake now. I can't speak for the man who came before me, the one who flinched. He had his reasons. This is a hard world, and he was given a hard hand. I held her gaze. When 3 weeks of bloom and one true night did something to the air in that small warm room that had nothing to do with any meter. But I'm choosing you, not the seat, not the clan, you. And in 3 days I'm going to walk into that magistrate's court and make your aunt hand you your father's chair with her own hands. And then I'm going to keep choosing you every day on purpose until you stop bracing for the day I don't. Su Wanqing, Frostflower of Cloudfall, who had not let a single soul close in 8 years, looked at me across that small room for a long, long moment, and the frost meter didn't just thaw. It cracked all the way through. Her hand came up hesitant, which on her was a tectonic event, and stopped a breath from my jaw, confirming the change in my face was real and not a trick of the lamplight, and her voice when it came had no frost left in it at all. Husband, she said. It wasn't flat, and it wasn't a title. And for one suspended moment in that warded little room, two people who had every reason in the world to keep a careful distance simply, finally, didn't. And then, because this is the kind of world it is, and the kind of luck I have, a sound came from the dark compound outside. Not a listener this time. A voice, low and venomous, carried on the night air from the far colonnade where Aunt Su Lan thought no warded study could hear her. Oh, a messenger I couldn't see. The magistrate's bought, the petition's airtight, Su Lan was saying. But the girl is stubborn, and the husband's gotten clever, and I no longer trust the court to finish it cleanly. A pause, a sip of something. Oh, so we hedge. Yanju went home wanting his pride back. The death vow has one other way to break that no magistrate can argue with. Send word to Goldfall. Tell the young master that if the husband simply dies before the hearing, the widow is free by law, and grateful, and his. The paper-cut smile was audible in the dark. And husbands like that one, nobody, no sect, no one to answer to, husbands like that die all the time. Most men, on overhearing a plot to murder them, would feel fear. I felt the cold, clean click of a case coming together, because Aunt Su Lan had just made the same mistake every overconfident party makes eventually. She'd told me her whole strategy. The petition and the knife. And a man who knows both prongs of a trap doesn't have to dodge, he can stand exactly where the trap is and let it close on the hand that set it. She just gave us everything, I told Wanqing, low. The two of us standing in the dark of the warded study with the venom of her aunt's voice still hanging in the night air outside. The petition's her front, the assassination's her hedge. She thinks one of them has to land before the hearing. I felt myself starting, against all the circumstances, to smile. Which means all we have to do is survive the knife and break the petition, and she spent every move she has in public, on the record, where the elder council can see her reach for both. Survive the knife, Wanqing repeated dryly. Well, you make it sound like an errand. It's the part you're better at than anyone alive. I'll handle the paper. You handle anyone who comes over the wall. I turned to the desk, pulled the petition toward me. She'd gotten a copy, of course she had, and there it was. Loose thread, glowing in the dark of the document the way it always does once you know where to look. And the paper's already done, Wanqing. Look. Her entire case rests on one claim, that the marriage is void because your father didn't knowingly bind you to a lawful party. That a dying clan head, of sound mind, named a specific man in a binding death vow by accident, like a fool. Yes, she said, watching me. And? When you can't inherit a man's authority by proving in open court that the man was incompetent. I laid it out the way I'd lay it for a judge. Blow, each piece clicking into the next. Su Lan is about to stand before the magistrate and argue that the late clan head, her own brother, a man whose authority she's claiming to inherit when the seat falls to her, was not of sound mind when he made his final binding decree. That his death vow doesn't count because he didn't know what he was doing. I looked up. If his death vow is void for incompetence, Wanqing, then so is every other thing he decreed on his deathbed. including the decree that named Sulan as senior elder of standing in the first place. She cannot argue your father was a fool whose dying words don't bind, and then claim a seat that only falls to her because of his dying words. She has to choose. Either the death vow stands, and your marriage is valid, and she loses. Or the death vow is void, and her own standing evaporates with it, and she loses. There is no version where the petition wins her the seat. It's a noose she's tying for her own neck and calling it a net for yours. The study was quiet. Wanqing read it once more over my shoulder, her clan head mind turning it the way mine had, and I watched her find the same airtight, beautiful, self-defeating shape I'd found. She doesn't see it, she said slowly, because she's so certain the law is on her side that she never read what the law would cost her to use. They never do. People in love with their own advantage stop reading at the part where they win. I set the petition down. We don't even have to stop the hearing. We want the hearing. We let her stand up in front of the magistrate and the council and spring her own trap on herself, in public, where every elder who's been on the fence sees exactly who she is and exactly what her cleverness is worth. 3 days. We just have to live to attend. And that, the we of it, the two of us bent over the same problem in a warded room, the clan head and the husband who'd been a joke a month ago, that was the moment I understood part of my life had quietly ended and another had begun. I wasn't surviving the Sioux clan anymore. I was running a campaign inside it, with the most powerful woman in Cloudfall as my partner instead of my judge. When the warmth meter glowing steady and unhidden in the corner of my sight told me she felt the shift too. The next 2 days, we built, not walls, trust. I went to Elder Wei and the council members who'd started to turn, and I didn't ask them to take sides. I just showed them the petition, and let them read it, and let them arrive on their own at the new Sulan had tied. The second evening, the council that had been split down the middle was quietly, grimly united behind their clan head, not because I'd argued them there, but because nothing makes a wavering house loyal like watching one of its own try to burn it down for a chair. Even Elder Fang, sour to the last, audited the petition's claims against the clan rolls unasked. Someone reported the inconsistencies to the council in his flat, incorruptible voice, and that was worth more than any speech I could have made. Su Hang started following me around. Not menacing now, guarding, in his clumsy way, a young bull who decided the doormat was his to protect, and was too proud to say so. Auntie Bo fed me warm meals openly in the kitchen, where everyone could see. The clan that had married Wanqing to a punchline was, arc by arc, becoming a clan that stood behind the both of us. And the system, quiet through all of it, rang once at the end of the second day, soft and almost approving. The husband is no longer the clan's joke. He is becoming its spine. The third night, the new moon, the hearing at dawn, the clan gathered in the great hall for a quiet assembly, the council and the household together. A show of unity before we walked into the magistrate's court as one. Lanterns everywhere, Wanqing at the high seat, and me, for the first time, invited to stand beside it rather than at the back among the furniture. The whole Sioux clan in one warm, lamplit room, united, ready, the trap laid and the morning won before it came. I should have known. A clan, all in one place, lanterns lit, guards relaxed, the night of the new moon when the dark is deepest, that isn't a celebration. It's a target. The lanterns went out all at once. Every flame in the hall snuffed in the same breath, plunging us into the black of a moonless night. When in the half-second before the screaming started I heard Wanqing's chair scrape and felt the temperature drop as her sword cleared its sheath. And then they came over the eastern wall, fast and silent and far above anything the relaxed houseguard could stop, gold silks traded for the gray of killers. A dozen blades pouring into the dark hall full of unarmed clan. Sulan hadn't waited for the court after all. The hedge had become the play. And at the center of the killers, where the deepest dark was, a thin old man with milky blind eyes lifted a censer of pale smoke and pointed it. Not at Wanqing, not at me, but at the space between us, and rasped a single word that I didn't understand yet and would spend the rest of the night, on a good part of my life, learning the price of. There. The dark lasted one breath. Then a woman near the east wall screamed, and the sound cut off hard. When the hall turned into the kind of place you don't walk out of unless you're fast and lucky, and someone between you and the blades knows what they're doing. I was not fast. I was not lucky. But the someone between me and the blades was Su Wanqing, and she was already moving before the scream finished. Her sword a pale line in the black, frost blooming along the edge like condensation on a winter window. A sudden, glacial wind swept through the hall, stealing the breath from my lungs. I felt it in my teeth. A Goldcore sword saint, unleashed in a closed room full of her own people, is a thing you survive, not watch. She has to be precise enough to kill a dozen men in the dark without catching a single cousin, and she is, because she's her. But when the first attacker crumpled without a sound before I'd finished stumbling backward. Chaos. Su Heng, of all people, put himself in a doorway with a kitchen cleaver he'd grabbed off the banquet table, the big idiot, shouting for the outer guards. Elder Wei dragged children behind the ancestor shrine. Auntie Bo threw a pot of hot soup at a man coming over the wall and bought 3 families 4 seconds to run. The clan guard rallied in clumps, rusty but willing, and the hall became a bad, bloody mess of close fighting and frost and screaming. I stayed down. Not cowardice, arithmetic. A live-in husband who suddenly fights like a pillar cultivator under 100 watching eyes is a live-in husband who gets a cage and a question session he doesn't survive. So I did what a body temper nobody does in a raid. I moved along the wall, stayed low, pulled a fallen woman behind an overturned table, and kept my head below the frost line while my wife carved a circle of slaughter into the floor. The attackers were good, Chi Si, maybe low pillar, professional killers in gray, but she was Goldcore. And the gap between those two things is the gap between a candle and a forest fire. 3 were down. 5. 7. The rest were breaking for the walls, and the clan guard was finding its spine. When I was starting to think about the hearing tomorrow, and how we'd explain the bodies to the magistrate when I felt it. The thread. The hair-thin line of warm light that ran from my chest to hers, the one I'd first seen at the banquet. One the system wouldn't explain, lit up. Not gently, not the soft glow of a milestone. It flared white-hot, and then it pulled, and the pull wasn't toward her. It was from her. Something was dragging energy out of the bond line like a man siphoning fuel from a pipe. When the direction of the pull led straight to the blind old man anchoring the blood-stained expanse of the killing floor, untouched. His sensor trailing pale smoke that no one was walking through, his milky eyes aimed at nothing and everything. He hadn't moved. He was doing something worse. What? I started, and then the pull spiked, and I felt it in my bones, not pain, exactly, but the sensation of something structural being stressed, like a beam in a wall taking weight it wasn't meant to carry. When I understood with a sick lurch that the thread wasn't just a line between us. It was a load-bearing wall, and the blind man was trying to bring it down. Wanqing felt it too. I saw her stumble, Su Wanqing, who moved like a blade on a rail, and her sword form degraded for one heartbeat. The frost flickering, her edge going dull. She recovered instantly, killed the man in front of her, but I saw her free hand go to her sternum, pressing flat against her chest the way you do when something inside suddenly feels wrong and you don't have a name for it yet. She didn't know what the thread was. She didn't know it existed. But she could feel it straining, because she'd been leaning on it, for weeks, maybe, unconsciously, drawing something through that invisible line the way you lean on a railing you don't realize is holding you up. Now the railing was shaking, and the part of her that had been quietly, secretly supported by it was starting to buckle. The blind man croaked another syllable. The pale smoke from his sensor thickened, curled, and reached, not toward either of us, but toward the space between, toward the thread itself. Where the smoke touched it, the warm light guttered and dimmed. The system, which had been silent and steady for days, blazed a warning I'd never seen before. Bond thread integrity, 94% to 81% to 73%. Warning. External entity is severing the hearth bond. Structural failure imminent. Countermeasure. A true mutual vow, spoken by both bonded, re-anchors the thread at full integrity. A true mutual vow. Both of us. Spoken in the middle of a firefight, while a blind man tried to cut the invisible thing connecting us, and while my wife, who didn't even know the thread existed, was discovering a sudden, ragged fragility in her step because something she'd been unconsciously relying on was being torn out from under her. 71%. 68%. Wanqing's sword form cracked again, and the usual seamless correction failed her. A gray-clothed killer got inside her guard, and she took a cut along her forearm, The first wound I'd ever seen her take, and the sound she made wasn't pain. It was confusion. She couldn't understand why she was slower. Why the chi that had always answered her like a trained hound was suddenly sluggish. Like something had been subtracted from the equation, and she couldn't find the missing number. Because it had. The thread wasn't one way. The system had been quiet about that part, that specific, careful quiet I'd noticed on day one. The quiet of a lender who doesn't mention the interest until you're already in debt. Every milestone she'd felt, every true regard that had paid me devotion and bloom and power, that energy hadn't just flowed to me. Some of it had flowed back, through the thread, into her, and she'd been using it without knowing, the way you breathe without thinking, the way your heart beats without permission. The thread was a circuit, not a wire, and the blind man wasn't attacking either of us. He was cutting the circuit, 63%. Wanqing's frost edge guttered. She killed the man who'd cut her, but it cost her 3 seconds it shouldn't have, and 2 more killers were closing the gap, narrowing the distance to the blind man she hadn't identified yet as the real threat, because she couldn't see what he was doing. No one could, except me. And I was the only person in this room who understood what was being destroyed and why it was killing her. I had to tell a woman who didn't know the system existed, who didn't know there was a thread, who didn't know her husband had been secretly leveling off her love for 3 weeks. I had to tell her all of that, right now, in the dark, with killers between us. And then ask her to say a vow she'd never been told was real. 58%. There was no time to be clever about it. There was no legal framing, no loophole, no carefully staged courtroom reveal. There was just the thread failing, and my wife bleeding, and a blind man pulling it apart. I moved. Not along the wall this time, through the fight, body temper speed and nothing more. Which in a room full of chi killers meant I was the slowest moving target in the hall, and I knew it. Something clipped my shoulder, a blade, a fist. I didn't stop to check, and then Su Heng was beside me, a big idiot with his cleaver, and he put his back against mine without a word, and we pushed through 3 meters of chaos together. And then I was behind Wanqing's guard, and I grabbed her wrist. She spun, sword at my throat, gray eyes wild with something I'd never seen in them, not fear, not rage. Disorientation. The ground had shifted under the most certain woman in Yunzhou, and she didn't know why. Blind man, I said fast, her blade cold against my neck. He's not attacking you. He's attacking the bond between us. There's a thread, you can't see it, I can, it runs from me to you, and you've been drawing on it, and he's cutting it. And that's why you're slow. That's why the chi feels wrong. You're losing something you didn't know you had. Her eyes searched mine. I watched her decide, in a fraction of a heartbeat, in the middle of a battle, whether I was mad or right. The sword didn't move. Frost burned cold against my skin. How? She said, one word. Not a question about the impossible, a question about the solution. Bond thread integrity, 52%. A vow, I said. A true one. Both of us spoken to each other now. It re-anchors the thread. It's the only thing the system says can stop what he's doing. I swallowed against the edge of her blade. I know you don't understand what I'm telling you. I know this sounds like I've lost my mind, but you can feel it, can't you? The thing that's missing. The thing that was there and now isn't. You've been leaning on it for weeks and you didn't know. 49%. Her eyes changed. Not belief, recognition. She couldn't see the thread. She couldn't see the system. But she could feel the absence, the structural gap, the missing rail she'd been leaning on, and she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a gold-core cultivator who understood chi the way a musician understands sound, that something real had been there and was being taken. The blind man croaked a third syllable. The smoke surged. Wanqing's ki guttered like a candle in wind, and I watched the strongest woman in Cloudfall nearly drop to one knee, catching herself on her sword, her jaw clenched so hard I heard the teeth. 44%. Say it with me, I said, and my voice was steady because it had to be, because one of us had to be. Say it now, Wanqing. Whatever is true. Whatever you actually feel, say it to me and mean it, and the thread holds. 42%. The blind man smiled. He could feel it failing. We thought he'd already won. And Su Wanqing, bleeding, staggering, her frost edge dying, to knee, the strongest sword in 3 generations brought low by something she couldn't see and didn't understand, looked at me across the blade she still held at my throat. When I saw the war in her face, the last wall of ice and 8 years of distance, and every defense she'd ever built, and I saw it start to crack the way a dam cracks. Not all at once, but in the one hairline fracture that means the whole thing is already decided. She opened her mouth. 39%. And the blind man turned toward us, and smiled wider, and lifted the sensor for one final syllable, and I knew with absolute, clear certainty that whatever she was about to say, she had to say it before that sound reached the air, because the thread was at 39% and falling. When the woman I'd married was bleeding and brave and about to tear down the silence of a decade, when I was not going to let a blind man with a sensor steal that moment to save hers. The blind man's throat tightened, the air around him beginning to vibrate with that final, killing syllable. He was leaning in, smelling the victory, convinced he was about to snap the last string of a puppet. Wanqing didn't look at him. She didn't look at the killers closing in. She looked at me, and for the first time in 8 years, the ice didn't just crack, it vanished. There was no mask, no clan head composure, just a raw, terrified clarity. She wasn't afraid of the blades, she was afraid of the void opening up where the thread had been, the sudden, jagged loneliness of realizing that the only thing holding her together in the dark was a man she'd spent a decade pretending didn't exist. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice trembling, a sound that should have been impossible for the frostflower of Cloudfall. "Oh, I cannot do this without you." It wasn't a poetic confession. It wasn't a scripted romance. It was a desperate, honest admission of dependency, the kind of truth that only comes when you're staring at the end of the line. And then she did the only thing that could bridge the gap. She didn't just speak the vow, she reached out, grabbed the front of my drab gray robes, and pulled me forward, crashing her lips against mine. Oh, it was a collision. It was clumsy, desperate, and tasted of copper and cold winter air. It was the first time we had ever touched with intention, and the moment our skin met, the system didn't just ring, it screamed. It's a critical milestone. First true vow, first kiss. Bond trade re-anchored, 38% to 100%. To vow deepening, tear jump triggered. Devotion, massive surge. Boon, vessel refinement, the bloom, tier 6. Oh, I didn't feel a surge of ki, I felt a surge of existence. The sensation was like a dormant engine finally catching fire. But for weeks, the bloom had been a slow, subtle sharpening, a clearer jawline, a steadier gaze, the kind of change people noticed after a long vacation. But a tier 6 jump triggered by a collapsing world isn't a subtle change, it's a revelation. What the pressure in my chest exploded outward. My spine didn't just straighten, it locked into a position of absolute authority. The haze of the doormat, the inherited slouch of 8 years spent shrinking into the wallpaper, was incinerated in a single heartbeat. My voice, my presence, the very air around me thickened, turning from a whisper into a roar. I felt my eyes clear, my vision sharpening until I could see the individual grains of smoke drifting from the blind man's sensor. I could see the hesitation in the killer's steps. And I knew, with the predatory instinct of a man who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom, that the disguise was officially over. I couldn't hide this. You can't hide a sun when it decides to rise in a cellar. The thread didn't just return, it ignited. A shockwave of gold-white warmth slammed outward from the point of our contact, a physical ripple of energy that didn't kill, but displaced. The 3 killers who had been closing in on us weren't cut down, they were simply erased from the immediate vicinity, thrown backward by a wall of pure, bonded intent that sent them skidding across the blood-slicked floor like stones skipped across a pond. Wanqing recoiled, her breath hitching, her eyes wide as she looked at me. She didn't see the doormat. She didn't see the joke husband. She saw a man whose presence now filled the hall, whose gaze held a weight that rivaled her own, whose face had been refined into something so magnetic it felt like a physical pull. She looked at me, and for the first time she looked small, not in power, but in the face of the sheer, concentrated intensity of what we had just triggered. The blind man didn't have time to react. He was still mid-syllable, his mouth open to deliver the killing blow, when the rebound hit. The hearthbond is a circuit, and he had spent the last 10 minutes trying to short it. But when the circuit closes at 100% integrity, the energy doesn't just flow, it snaps back. The pale smoke he'd been using to dissect us suddenly inverted, rushing back toward the sensor with the force of a gale. The smoke didn't just return, it clung to him, wrapping around his milky eyes and his withered hands like a shroud of his own making. He let out a sound, a wet, rattling choke, as the very energy he'd tried to siphon was shoved back into his marrow. He collapsed, the sensor shattering on the floor, his blind eyes rolling back as the rebound of the bond tore through his nervous system. He wasn't dead, but he was broken, a ruined tool left twitching in the dirt. The silence that followed was absolute. The remaining raiders stopped. They looked at the blind man, then at the woman who was the most feared sword in the province, and then at me. I looked at the man in the gray robes who was currently radiating a level of presence that made their own chi cultivation feel like a children's toy. I didn't have a sword, I didn't have a technique. But I had the bloom, and I had a wife who was currently staring at me as if I were a ghost she'd fallen in love with. "Get out," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The voice that came out of my chest wasn't the voice of a divorced lawyer or a live-in husband. It was a voice that commanded the room, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in the floorboards and settled in the marrow of everyone present. The killers didn't argue. They didn't try to rally. They turned and fled back over the walls, chased by the belated shouts of the Sioux Clan guard, leaving behind a hall of broken lanterns, blood, and a stunned family who had just watched their joke of a husband become the center of gravity. Wanqing stepped back, her hands still hovering near her lips, her gray eyes searching mine with a mixture of awe and absolute confusion. She looked at the blood on her arm, then back at me, the thread between us now humming with a frequency so loud I could almost hear it. "What? What are you?" she whispered. I let the half-smile play across my lips, the one that knew exactly what it was doing to her. I didn't tell her about the system. I didn't tell her about the devotion or the boons. I just stepped closer, the magnetism of the bloom pulling her back toward me even as she tried to maintain her distance. "I'm your husband, Wanqing," I said, my voice dropping an octave, smooth and dangerous. "Oh, and I think we're done being the joke." For a moment, the world felt steady. The crisis had passed, the killers were gone, and I could feel the warmth of her regard, now genuine, now terrified, now fascinated, bleeding into the bond like a river in flood. I could feel the power settling into my bones, the vessel refined, the doormat burned away. I felt like I could walk through a mountain and come out the other side without a scratch. But as I reached out to steady her, a new panel slid into my vision. It wasn't the soft gold of the hearth bond. It wasn't a milestone or a reward. It was a stark, obsidian black, the text written in a shimmering cold silver that made the hair on my arms stand up. It didn't offer a boon. It didn't track regard. It was a ledger. Lender, the right spirit of the two hearths. Status, debt acknowledged. Interest accrued. Notice, the bond has reached critical mass. The terms of the initial grant are now active. I froze. The victory in the room, the cheering of the clan, the relieved sobs of the servants, faded into a dull hum. I stared at the black panel, the lawyer in me screaming that I'd just signed a contract without reading the fine print. Lender, en route. The cheering lasted about 10 minutes. Then the staring started, and the staring was worse. I could see the wreckage of my reputation before the last raider cleared the wall. 100 pairs of eyes had just watched a live-in husband, the clan's favorite punching bag, the man who carried water and stood in the back. Well, tell a room full of killers to leave, and the killers left. Not because of Wanqing's sword. Not because of the clan guard. Because of me. Because something had rolled out of my chest and rearranged the geometry of the hall. When every person with working chi senses had felt it. When now every person with working eyes was trying to reconcile the man they'd been stepping over for 8 years with the man currently claiming the carnage like he'd been born for it. Not as the focal point of the wreckage. I found a pillar near the wall, slid down it, and put my head in my hands like a man who'd just survived a terrifying night and had nothing left. Which, technically, was true. The bloom was still radiating. Tier 6 doesn't turn off like a lamp, but I could blunt it. Pull the intensity inward. Let the exhaustion show and the magnetism fade to a low hum, the way you dim a lantern by cupping your hand around it. Not gone. Just not the first thing you notice. Su Heng found me there. The big idiot was covered in someone else's blood, his kitchen cleaver still in hand, and he looked at me the way you look at a chair that just bit you. You, He started and stopped and tried again. That thing you did, the light, I panicked, I said. Which was also technically true. Panicked, he repeated. I grabbed Wanqing. Something happened. I don't know what. I looked up at him with the specific expression of a man who has been terrified and confused and is now very tired. You saw the same thing I did. I don't have an explanation, Heng. I'm a body temper who kissed his wife in a dark room. That's all I've got. He stared. His mouth worked. Then he looked at the cleaver in his hand, and at the bodies on the floor, and at the clan members beginning to pick themselves up. When I watched the rationalization take hold, because people want the easy answer, always, and the joke husband has a secret power, is not an easy answer. Something the lady did, he muttered. Her gold core chi, bleeding off into him during the whatever that was. Resonance. Married couples in old stories sometimes, yeah. He nodded, convincing himself. That's it, her power, channeling through him. Not him. I could have kissed the man. Not on the mouth, I'd had enough of that for one evening, but on the forehead, in gratitude. Or the beautiful stupidity of a mind that would rather invent a folklore phenomenon than believe the doormat got up off the floor. That's it, I agreed softly. Her power, not me. He nodded again, firmer, and went off to help Elder Wei with the wounded, and I let my head fall back against the pillar and exhaled. The gold panel was still there. The normal one, soft, warm, the familiar interface, and beneath it, the other thing. The one from the end of the fight, the one that didn't belong to the Hearthbond. It had come from somewhere else, somewhere older, and its text sat in my vision like a scar that wouldn't fade. Lender. The right spirit of the two hearths. Status. Debt acknowledged. Interest accrued. Notice. The bond has reached critical mass. The terms of the initial grant are now active. Lender. En route. I didn't know what a right spirit was. I didn't know what the terms were. I didn't know what the interest on a bond between two married people could possibly look like. When the part of me that had spent a career reading contracts was screaming that the most dangerous clause in any agreement is the one you didn't know you signed. But the panel offered no details, and the system, my system, the gold one, the one that had been with me since the well, went quiet when I asked. That same careful silence. Silence of a thing that had handed me a gift and a bill at the same time, and was waiting for me to finish enjoying the gift before it mentioned the bill. Later. That problem was later. Right now the problem was mourning, and the hearing, and the fact that Sulan's void petition, the one that argued my marriage was invalid from the start, was still scheduled for tomorrow at the magistrate's court, and the assassination raid hadn't cancelled it. If anything, it had made it worse, because now the clan was rattled, the elders were looking for someone to blame, when a woman who just kissed her joke husband under the collective gaze of the entire court was going to walk into a courtroom and try to defend a marriage she'd only just stopped pretending didn't exist. The clan had spent the night cleaning blood off the floors and boarding up the shattered walls. The blind man had been taken to a cellar under guard, still unconscious, still twitching. No one knew who'd sent him. No one knew how he'd gotten past the outer wards. Those were questions for later, and later was coming fast. She walked out of the inner hall in clean robes, the same deep blue, the same white sash. Because Su Wanqing didn't own a different color and wouldn't, and her arm was bandaged where the blade had caught her, and her hair was damp. When she looked like a woman who had slept exactly 0 hours and was not planning to. She stopped 3 paces away. The thread between us hummed. I'd see it in the pre-dawn gray, a faint warm filament running chest to chest. It was steady and bright, and nothing like the guttering thing it had been when the blind man was tearing at it. She couldn't see it. But she could feel it. I could tell from the way she stood, the slight forward lean of someone whose balance has shifted and hasn't corrected yet. You sat down, she said. I'm very tired. You sat down on purpose. You made yourself small again after. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. After the hall saw what they saw. Yes. Because if they believed it was you, they'd... Cage. Questions. Quiet knife. Quick one. I looked up at her. I've been hiding since the morning I arrived, Wanqing. That hasn't changed because of one good night. She was quiet. The gray eyes held mine, and the thread hummed, and something in her expression softened, not dramatically, not a thaw. Just a thinning of the ice that I wouldn't have noticed 3 weeks ago, but that I could read now, the way I'd once read a difficult client across a conference table. "You kissed me to save my life," she said. "I kissed you because a blind man was murdering our bond and the system said a true vow would re-anchor it, and that was the fastest true thing I could." I stopped. Rewound. Looked at her. "No, that's the excuse. The system gave the excuse. I kissed you because you were bleeding, and I couldn't stand it, and because I've wanted to since the night you told me to sit down before someone helped me. And because in that moment there was nothing in either world I wanted more than to not lose you." She didn't move. Her hand drifted up, not to her lips, but to her sternum, to the place where the thread anchored, a place she'd been pressing all night without understanding why. Her fingers rested there, light, and the thread pulsed warm, and I felt it register. Milestone. First honest admission. Regard. 62% to 65%. Devotion. Steady accrual. Not a boon. Not a tear jump. Just the quiet tick of a meter that was no longer a meter, it was a tide, and the tide was coming in whether she willed it or not. "I don't understand what you are," she said, and her voice was low and steady. When stripped of everything except the raw fact of a woman standing in a courtyard at dawn with a husband she could no longer categorize. "I don't understand the light or the thread, or why my chi moves differently when you're near. I don't understand why I feel like something has been added to me that I can't give back." "You can't," I said, "and I can't explain it yet. Not all of it, but I will, after the hearing." Her eyes sharpened, the clan head surfacing through the woman. "When? Your aunt's void petition. Tomorrow. Today now. Today. It still live." Something crossed her face, the flicker of a general remembering there's a second front. She'd been so consumed by the raid, by the kiss, by the structural revelation of a bond she hadn't known existed, but the legal threat had slid to the back of her mind. It slid back to the front now, and with it came the hard set of her jaw that I'd learned to read as Su Wanqing preparing to win. "The petition claims the marriage was void from inception," she said. "Father's death vow was made under duress, that's their argument. They have an elder willing to testify he saw the old head pressured. Su Lan's bought elder, yes. It's perjury. It's perjury that works if the magistrate is hers." I stood. The bloom hummed low, and I watched her eyes catch on me, that involuntary flick, a gaze snagging on something it couldn't ignore, the pull she still hadn't learned to resist. "Is the magistrate hers?" Silence. A long one. The dawn light came up enough to turn her silver-black hair to cold mercury, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not the mountain, not the blade, but the specific, controlled fury of a strategist discovering a blind spot in her own perimeter. "To confirm the hearing schedule, the clerk returned this morning." She paused. "The magistrate has been replaced. A man named Fang Zhou. Transferred from Jade Peak 3 days ago. Su Lan's cousin married into the Fang family 9 years back. 3 days ago." While I was preparing counter-arguments and studying precedent and building a legal trap I was proud of, Su Lan had been replacing the judge. The petition that argued my marriage never existed was about to be heard by a man whose family owed Su Lan a favor, when the elder willing to commit perjury was already rehearsed, and the raid had been the distraction. The chaos that kept everyone too busy to check whether the courtroom had been stacked until it was too late to unstack it. My lawyer brain, which had been riding the high of a one battle all night, landed on the cold concrete of a fact it had missed. The hearing was in 4 hours, the bench was bought, the witness was forged, the petition looked airtight. And the only evidence I had to counter it, my knowledge of clan law, my preparation, my careful legal architecture, was a paper shield facing a courtroom where the man with the gavel had already decided the verdict before the doors opened. "How bad?" she said. Not a question. "Bad enough that I need to stop pretending I'm a body temper with a lucky streak," I said. When the words tasted like the beginning of something I couldn't take back. "How much does the Fang family want?" "More than we have." Her gaze held mine, steady, furious, trusting in a way that made the thread sing. "And less than Su Lan is willing to spend to be rid of you." 4 hours, a bought magistrate, an airtight petition, and a wife who was looking at me like I was the only man in Yunzhou who could find the crack in a wall that had been built without one. I was going to have to be. The magistrate's court was a room I recognized from the wrong life, too clean, too formal, arranged to make the person at the center feel small. Wooden benches in rows, a raised bench at the front. A clerk with ink and a brush, recording everything, because everything said in this room would become precedent. When precedent in this world was a weapon you sharpened for decades. The magistrate sat behind the bench. I didn't know his name. Wanqing had told me he was transferred 3 days ago, connected to Sulan by marriage, and that was enough. He had the specific calm of a man who'd already been paid, the kind of composure that doesn't come from confidence in the law but from confidence in the outcome. His robes were dark green, the color of a mid-ranking official who knows which way the wind blows and has arranged his face accordingly. Sulan sat at the petitioner's table. Plum robes, jade pins, sour smile, the full uniform. Behind her stood an elder I'd seen once at a banquet, thin, nervous, his every word polished to a suspicious, rehearsed shine. A perjury witness. He held a scroll like a talisman, gripping it the way you grip something you've been paid to hold regardless of what it says. Our table was bare. Just me, Wanqing, and whatever I could build out of air and precedent in the next 30 minutes. The clerk called the session. The magistrate, I'll call him what he was, Sulan's man, opened with the gravity of someone performing fairness. Petition avoidance. The Su clan, through Elder Sulan, petitions that the marriage between Su Wanqing and Zhang Mu was void from inception, having been sealed under a death vow extracted under duress. The petitioner requests annulment and restoration of the heir's eligibility. Sulan rose. Oh, she did it well, measured, dignified, a wronged elder seeking justice. My late brother, the former clan head, was in his final hours. His mind was failing, his body was failing. His death vow spoken by a man who cannot distinguish his physician from his chamberlain is not a vow, it is a dying fancy. And it has bound this clan to a humiliation for 8 years. She gestured to the nervous elder. Elder 2 witnessed the old head's condition. We will testify. Elder 2 stepped forward and unrolled his scroll with the care of a man handling fireworks. I attended the former head in his final days. He was confused. He called for people who were not present. He mistook me for his deceased wife on 2 occasions. On the day he spoke the marriage vow, he was, a pause, rehearsed, timed for effect. Not of sound judgment. It was clean. It was delivered well. And if the magistrate was already Sulan's, it was enough. Wanqing's hand rested on the table, not tense, not shaking. Just there, pale and still, the hand of a woman who'd drawn a sword in a dark hall 12 hours ago and was now sitting in a courtroom watching someone try to erase her father's last word with a rehearsed lie. I stood. The magistrate's eyes moved to me with the specific disinterest of a man who'd been told the husband was a formality. The respondent may speak. Respondent wishes to establish a point of procedure before addressing the petition, I said, and the courtroom voice came up, not the bloom, not the magnetism. It was just the old divorce lawyer's register, calm and level, forged by 1,000 hostile benches where raising your voice means you've lost control of the room. She petitions on behalf of the Su clan to void a marriage sealed by the former clan head. I paused, not for drama, for the clerk's brush. Let it dry. I'd like to clarify the petitioner's standing. Under Su clan law, Article 9, Succession and Regency, when a clan head dies and the heir is not yet of age or has not formally assumed the seat, a regent may be appointed to manage clan affairs. The regent holds administrative authority. They do not hold the authority of the clan head. Sulan's smile thinned by a fraction. Elder Sulan has served as regent since the former head's death, 8 years. I looked at the magistrate. During which time, the heir, Su Wanqing, reached the age of majority, achieved gold core cultivation, and has, by any reasonable standard of clan governance, met every qualification to assume the head's seat. Yet no formal assumption has been recorded. The petitioner has continued to act as regent. She has signed clan documents under regental authority. She has filed this petition under regional authority. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of surprise, the quiet of people realizing where a sentence is going, and not wanting to be the first to say it. So my question is simple, I said. By what authority does a regent petition to void a clan head's death vow? Because Article 9 is clear. A regent manages affairs. A regent does not inherit the clan head's authority to seal or unseal vows. That authority passes to the heir. The heir has not voided this marriage. The heir is, in fact, sitting at this table defending it. Which means the petitioner is exercising a power she does not hold, and has been exercising it for 8 years. Sulan stood. This is irrelevant to the... It's relevant to everything, I said, and turned to the magistrate. Because if the court recognizes that the petitioner has been acting beyond her legal authority, signing documents, filing petitions, managing clan affairs as regent after the heir was eligible to assume the seat, then every action she's taken in that capacity is voidable. Including this petition. The magistrate's composure cracked. Not much. A hairline fracture, the kind you'd miss if you weren't reading faces for a living. He looked at Sulan, his gaze shifting as the morning's professional courtesy curdled into the cold appraisal of a liability. Quiet. Careful. A man recalculating. Sulan's face had gone the color of old plum. The heir has not formally. Then let's formalize it now, I said. Su Wanqing meets every criterion under Article 9, age of majority, cultivation at Goldcore or above, acknowledgement by at least 2 sitting elders. Elder Wei is present. I gestured to the back of the room, where the old elder sat wrapped in bandages from the night before, his face grim. It was not immediate and emphatic. Elder Wei acknowledges. Well, a second acknowledging elder is, I turned to Sulan with an expression I'd worn in 100 courtrooms. Patient. Almost sympathetic. You, Elder Sulan. You acknowledged her qualification when you filed this petition on the clan's behalf. It's in your own paperwork. Page 3. The clerk looked up from his brush. The magistrate looked at the petition. Sulan looked at me with something past fury, something cold and architectural. The stare of a woman watching a building she'd spent 8 years constructing get demolished by its own blueprints. The court recognizes Su Wanqing as clan head, the magistrate said. He said it fast, like ripping a bandage, because the alternative was ruling that a regent's 8 years of signatures were invalid. When that would unwind half the clan's records, and every deal Sulan had cut in that time. Cheaper to give us the seat, cheaper to cut his losses. The regency is dissolved. The petition of voidance, filed under regental authority, is dismissed for lack of standing. The brush moved. The record closed. And just like that, the marriage wasn't void, the regency was gone, and Wanqing was clan head, not by ceremony, not by the slow acclamation I'd planned, but by Sulan's own petition handing me the lever I needed to pry her out of the chair she'd kept warm for 8 years. Wanqing stood. She didn't look at me. She looked at her aunt, and whatever was in her eyes made Sulan's sour smile die completely. Elder Sulan, she said, and the title was a blade elder, not aunt, not regent. I will surrender all clan seals, keys, and records to the steward's office by noon. You confine yourself to your residence until I determine the scope of your actions under the regency. You will not leave the clan grounds. Sulan's mouth opened. Closed. Her hands were white-knuckled on the table edge, and I could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the same rapid, whispered arithmetic I'd watched on 1,000 faces across 1,000 conference tables. The moment a litigant realizes the verdict is locked and starts shopping for the exit, she stood. She gathered her robes. She walked toward the door with the rigid posture of a woman who refused to let a room see her bleed. And I watched her go, and the lawyer in me said, follow her, she's planning something. But the clan head's new authority was still settling, and the courtroom was still watching, and there was nothing I could do except let her walk. She was fast. By the time the guards reached her residence, she was gone. Over the back wall, through the servants' alley, into the city. Into a 50-year-old woman in plum robes moving with the urgency of someone who'd already arranged her escape route before she needed it. I found out why 3 hours later. Wanqing found it first, in the study, in the locked cabinet where Sulan's regental seals had gathered a decade of dust. A cabinet that was now empty, its contents gone, and the inventory list that should have been inside replaced with a single torn page from an older document. A page from the Su clan's ancestral records. The location and access sequence for a protected resource, a secret realm entrance, buried in the clan's oldest territory. What kind of thing that could buy an army, or start a war? She'd taken it, and she'd run straight to the only power in the province that could shield her from a clan head's wrath. Goldfall sect. I read the missing pages summary twice, and the second time my hands were steady and my jaw was set, because the joke of it was perfect. We'd won the courtroom, won the marriage, won the clan. Won the woman who'd tried to destroy all three had just handed the most dangerous secret the Sioux family owned to the young master who wanted my wife and was willing to burn everything to get her. The gold panel pulsed like a distant heartbeat in the periphery, not a milestone, a warning. External threat detected. Bond thread stability monitored. I closed the cabinet. Looked at Wan Qing, who was standing in the wreck of her aunt's study with the torn pages twin in her hand, her gray eyes flat and lethal. "She sold us," Wan Qing said. Quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes a drawn sword. "She sold you," I corrected. "I'm the bonus." The transition from joke husband to the man who dismantles your life with a paragraph happened faster than I'd expected. For 8 years, the Sioux clan had treated me like a piece of furniture that occasionally needed feeding. Now, they looked at me with the cautious curiosity people reserve for a dormant volcano. They didn't love me, not by a long shot, but they were terrified of the version of me that had just stripped a regent of her power in 20 minutes of procedural carnage. Wan Qing didn't give me a title. She didn't need to. She just gave me the keys to the archives and a blank check for the clan's administration. "The elders are fighting over the grain levies," she told me, her voice still carrying that blade-like precision, though the edge was softer now. "We've been arguing for 3 years. I don't have the patience to listen to them pretend they care about the peasants while they steal from each other. Fix it." I looked at her, and the bond thread between us gave a low, contented hum. She wasn't asking me to be a servant. She was asking me to be her brain. I spent the first week in the steward's office, which was essentially a dusty room filled with ledgers that looked like they'd been written by people who enjoyed the smell of mildew. The clan economy was a disaster. It wasn't that they were poor, the Sioux clan had resources, but the distribution was a nightmare of spite and old grudges. 2 factions of elders, the Mountain Group and the Valley Group, had spent years rigging the internal tax codes to ensure the other side's disciples got slightly worse pills and slightly smaller rooms. It was a war of attrition fought with ink and accounting. To a normal cultivator, it was a headache. To a veteran of 10 years hunting the single clause in a 100-page settlement that saved a client's beach house, it was a playground. I didn't ask for a vote. I just spent 3 days cross-referencing the ancestral land grants with the current levy distributions. I found the leak. It wasn't just greed. It was a systemic error in how the outer clan scouts were being paid, a loophole that allowed the mountain elders to skim off the top while blaming the valley elders for the shortfall. I summoned them both to the hall. The elders came in with the air of men who expected to be bored. They sat in their heavy robes, leaning back, eyes hooded, waiting for the lucky husband to stumble over his words. I didn't give them the chance. I laid out 3 ledgers on the table, open to specific pages, and I didn't speak for a full minute. I just tapped a finger on a column of numbers. "Elder Su Kai," I said, looking at the leader of the mountain faction. "Your disciples' training stipends increased by 12% last quarter." Curiously, that increase correlates exactly with the shortfall in the outer clan scouts' rations. Now, I could bring this to the clan head as a matter of embezzlement, which carries a penalty of stripped cultivation and exile. Sukai's face didn't just pale, it turned a shade of gray that almost matched the floor. We started to speak, something about clerical errors, something about the complexity of the logistics, and I cut him off with a single, flat palm on the table. "Don't. I've read the ink. I've tracked the flow. I know exactly which ghost account you're using to hide the surplus." I leaned in, the bloom humming just beneath the surface, giving my voice a weight that made the other elders shift in their seats. "Here is the deal. You will restore the funds to the scouts by tomorrow morning. You will sign a revised levy agreement that removes the administrative fee your faction has been collecting since the 3rd year of the Regency. And in exchange, I will forget that I ever saw the ghost account." The room went dead silent. Valley elders looked at me as though I were a sudden ghost in the room, and Su Kai was looking at me with a mixture of horror and an unexpected, grudging respect. He realized he wasn't dealing with a doormat. He was dealing with a predator who didn't use a sword, but used the law to put a leash on your neck. He signed. By the time the sun set, I had settled a 3-year feud with a few strokes of a brush and a well-placed threat. I didn't want their gratitude. Gratitude is fickle. I wanted their fear of my ledger. As I walked back to the inner quarters, I felt a sudden, sharp spike of warmth in my chest. Milestone. First genuine respect from the clan collective. Regard, 65% to 68%. Devotion, plus 25. Boon granted. Technique, the gaze of the arbiter. The system didn't just give me power, it gave me a tool. The gaze of the arbiter wasn't a combat skill. It was a passive sensory boost. Suddenly, when I looked at people, I didn't just see their faces. I saw the tension of their lies. A slight shimmer of red when they bluffed, a flicker of blue when they were terrified. It was the ultimate lie detector, the perfect courtroom tool, and it made the world look like a series of open books. I found Wan Qing in the training courtyard. She was mid-strike, her longsword a blur of frost-white light that sliced through a training dummy with a sound like a cracking glacier. She stopped, the sword returning to her side in a fluid motion, and she looked at me. The thread between us was pulsing. It was thicker now, a vivid, glowing filament that seemed to vibrate whenever we stood within 10 paces of each other. Well, she didn't ask me how the meeting went. She didn't need to. She could see the way the elders were now avoiding her gaze, and she could see the way I was standing, shoulders back, jaw set, jaw full bloom, refining the edges of my presence into something that no longer felt like a disguise. "You're becoming dangerous," she said, and there was a tiny, almost invisible curve to her lips. "I'm a lawyer, Wan Qing. Dangerous is my default setting." She stepped closer, and for a moment, the world narrowed down to the space between us. The air felt charged, the kind of atmospheric pressure that happens right before a storm breaks. Her gray eyes searched mine, and the static of the weather finally cleared to reveal the mountain beneath. I saw a woman who was genuinely curious about the man her father had tied her to. She reached out, her fingers brushing the sleeve of my robe, a touch so light it was almost an accident, but the system flared white-hot. Regard, 68% to 71%. She caught herself and pulled back, her expression returning to that composed, icy mask, but the damage was done. She was losing the fight against the pull. She hated it, and she loved it, and it was the most honest thing about her. "We can't relax," she said, her voice returning to the clan head's register. "Su Lan is gone, but she didn't leave empty-handed. The secret realm coordinates are in the hands of the Goldfall sect. Yan Zhou isn't the kind of man to let a prize like that sit idle. He'll use it to leverage the clan, or he'll use it to force me into a position where I have to choose between the ancestral lands and my title." "He's an arrogant brat with a gold pin in his hair," I said, leaning against a stone pillar. "He doesn't think in terms of leverage. He thinks in terms of ownership. He doesn't want the land. He wants the win. He wants to be the one who finally broke the Frostflower. And he has the means to do it," she replied. I started to answer, to tell her that I was already drafting 3 different legal counterstrikes that would make Yan Zhou's sectmaster have a heart attack, but the sound of the outer gates swinging open cut me off. It wasn't the sound of a guest, it was the sound of an arrival. A group of riders entered the courtyard, their horses draped in white and gold silk. At the lead was a man in the high-collared robes of a Goldfall envoy, his face a mask of aristocratic disdain. He didn't bow. He didn't acknowledge the clan guards. He simply stopped his horse 10 feet from us and looked down at Wan Qing with the expression of a landlord talking to a tenant who was 3 months behind on rent. "Su Wan Qing," the envoy announced, his voice echoing through the silent courtyard. "I bring a mandate from the Goldfall sect. Young Master Yan Zhou has suffered a grievous injury and a loss of face due to the unorthodox events of the recent raid on your household. He finds the current state of your marriage offensive to the balance of the province." I felt the thread between us tighten, a warning vibration. "The sect demands redress," the envoy continued, his eyes flicking to me for a split second, a look of pure, unadulterated disgust, as if he'd just spotted a cockroach on a silk rug. "And they have decided that the only acceptable apology is the immediate and permanent removal of the husband from the Su clan's records. By any means necessary." He didn't say divorce. He didn't say annulment. By any means necessary was the language of a hit squad. And as I looked at the envoy's hand, I saw the Goldfall seal glowing with a faint, oppressive light, not a request, not a demand backed by the weight of a sect that could flatten Cloudfall City if they felt like it. The Goldfall envoy didn't wait for an answer. He didn't need to. A sect mandate isn't a request, it's a weather front, and most people just find shelter until it passes. Wanqing didn't. She stepped forward, frost shivering along her blade, and the temperature in the courtyard dropped before she'd said a word. The Su clan does not negotiate its marriage records with envoys, she said. Tell young Master Yan that if he wishes to discuss balance, he can do so in person. Until then, leave my gates. The envoy's composure cracked for exactly 1 second. He didn't argue. He looked at me the way you look at a stain on a carpet, then wheeled his horse and left. The message riding out with him was clear enough. Goldfall was done litigating. That night the inner quarters felt different. The win over the elders had given me a foothold. The Goldfall threat had put a ceiling on it. I found Wanqing in her father's old study, the room smelling of ink and cold tea. She wasn't practicing her sword. She was looking at a portrait of the old clan head, her face, softer, with the same gray eyes and none of the armor. I leaned in the doorframe and watched her. The thread between us hummed, low and steady, and for the first time it felt less like a reward ticking over and more like a conversation. It wasn't just reacting to her anymore. It had its own rhythm now, one that had started keeping time with my own heartbeat. The system had spent weeks telling me only about her regard. The thread, it turned out, had opinions of its own. He didn't actually care about the marriage, she said without turning around. Yan Zhu doesn't care about me. He cares about the fact that I am the only thing in this province he cannot possess. The classic collector's impulse, I said, stepping into the room. Once you tell a man he can't have the painting, he'll burn the whole gallery just to be the one who saw it go up in flames. She turned, and for a second the mask slipped. Not the ice goddess, not the clan head. Just a 27-year-old woman who'd been carrying a house on her back since she was 19, with shadows under her eyes that no cultivation could burn off. My father didn't marry me to you as a joke, Zhangmu, she whispered. I stopped. The system didn't flare, but the air grew still. He knew the clan was rotting, she continued, her voice dropping an octave. He knew that the moment he died, the elders would try to carve the Su name into pieces. He needed someone who existed outside their system. Someone they would despise, someone they would ignore, and therefore, someone who could see the rot without being part of it. She looked at me. When the gaze was raw, stripped of the usual composure. He didn't choose a husband, he chose a witness. He chose someone who would survive the purge because he was too insignificant to be a target. I understood the strategy, the hidden asset, the man too insignificant to be a target. The lawyer in me admired it. The rest of me felt something the system doesn't have a meter for, looking at what it had actually cost her to carry that plan alone for 8 years. The one the archives mentioned, I said. The one who vanished 3 years ago? Wanqing's expression tightened. A flicker of genuine pain crossed her face, a momentary crack in the glacier. She was the only one who understood. She tried to help me stabilize the clan's outer perimeter, but she found something in the ancestral records that she couldn't handle. She left a note saying the truth was too heavy, and then she disappeared. No trace, no body, just a void where a mentor should have been. She looked away, shoulders dropping a fraction. She wasn't a sovereign with 1,000 bowed heads right then. She was a woman who'd lost everyone who ever actually knew her. I didn't have a line for that. I didn't try to lawyer it. Just crossed the room and put a hand on her shoulder, no angle to it, nothing I was gaming for. The thread lit like a struck match. Warmth flooded from her chest into mine, gold-white and bright enough to blind. Not the sharp spike of a public win. Something slower. Weeper. The particular ache of being seen and not flinching from it. Milestone. First shared moment of genuine vulnerability. Regard, 71% to 78%. Devotion, plus 40. Boon granted. Passive ability, the hearth's resonance. The reward landed like a wave of heat, but the resonance was what mattered. A new layer under the gaze, not just her tension anymore, but the shape of her feeling underneath it. Anxious, resolute, simply tired. I could read her now, not just detect her. The thread changed too. It wasn't a line anymore. It was a loop, a thin thread of my own energy running back toward her, and in return, a sliver of her gold core strength settling into my spine. Something built to run both ways, quietly, in whatever gap the system's interface didn't cover. She leaned into the touch 3 seconds longer than she needed to before she remembered who she was and stepped back, the clan head's mask sliding back into place. Go to bed, Jongmu, she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. We have a sect to outmaneuver tomorrow. I grinned, the self-deprecating half-smile that usually drove her crazy. Yes, clan head. The next morning, I needed to clear my head. Goldfall threat was a storm on the horizon, and the internal politics of the Sioux clan were finally stable enough that I could afford an hour of anonymity. I headed into the Cloudfall City Market, blending into the crowd in my drab gray robes. To the world, I was still the doormat husband, the man who existed as a footnote in Wanqing's legend. It was the perfect camouflage. The market was a chaos of shouting vendors, floating spirit lamps, and the smell of grilled skewers in ozone. I spent an hour wandering, using the gaze of the arbiter to watch the flow of the city. It was fascinating, seeing the red shimmers of a merchant lying about the purity of his jade, the blue flickers of a nervous courier. The city was a map of hidden agendas, and I was the only one with the legend. I was stopping at a tea stall, watching a group of low-level cultivators argue over a map, when the world shifted. It wasn't a system alert. It wasn't a surge of chi. It was a feeling of sudden, oppressive stillness, as if the noise of the market had been muted by a heavy curtain. I looked toward the far end of the street, near the shadow of the old city wall. There, leaning against a weathered stone pillar, was a man. He was old, so old his skin looked like parchment that had been folded too many times. He wore robes of a dusty, nondescript brown, the kind of clothes a beggar or a failed scholar would wear. He didn't have a sword. He didn't have a sect emblem. He didn't even have a visible cultivation base. Our eyes met, and the bond thread in my chest screamed. It wasn't a threat response. It was recognition. The same frequency as the system, the same gold-warm resonance, just with the polish stripped off. The old man didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just watched me with eyes that looked like they had seen the birth and death of 1,000 clans. Then, he slowly raised a hand and made a small, circular gesture, the universal sign for wait, before turning and vanishing into the crowd with a fluidity that defied his age. I stood frozen, my tea cooling in my hand. The system remained silent. No milestone, no warning. Just the lingering vibration of the thread and the sudden, more terrifying realization that the cheat I'd been using to climb the ladder wasn't a gift from a benevolent god. It was alone, and the man in the dust robes looked exactly like the kind of person who comes to collect the interest. The dust-robed man haunted me for exactly one night before reality shoved him out of the way. Dawn brought a stranger to the east gate, a lean, sun-weathered woman in a patched brown and green scout jacket, 19 or 20, who talked her way past 3 guards by informing them, loudly, that she'd walked 2 days from the outer camps and would very much like to deliver her message to someone with a functioning brain before she collapsed. The guards, sensibly, brought her to me instead of Wanqing. Inside was the one people had started routing problems to when they wanted them solved rather than sorted. "You're the husband," she said, looking me up and down with the frank, undisguised curiosity of someone who has heard a rumor and is now checking it against the evidence. "Huh," they said, pathetic. "You don't look pathetic. You look like a man who's about to have a very bad week." She stuck out a hand, calloused, ink-stained at the nail beds from map work. "Mei Lin, Outer Clan Scout. I run the Eastern Watch Line, which means I am currently the only person in this clan who's actually looked at what's coming up the Eastern Road. And I am here because nobody else was going to walk 2 days to tell you." "Tell me what?" "Goldfall's moving." She said it flat, the way you report weather. Not because she didn't understand the weight of it, but because she'd already spent 2 days carrying that weight and had run out of ways to soften it. Not a raiding party, a column. Planners, siege gear, the kind of number you send when you intend to occupy a city, not raid it. 3 days out, maybe 4 if the roads are bad. She looked at me, then past me at the compound, at the Sioux clan going about its mourning like the mourning was a thing it still owned. "Your young master's sect finally got tired of losing to a doormat in every room that keeps score. I'd guess someone in Goldfall decided the next argument wasn't going to be a legal one." I felt the cold, clean click of a case reassembling itself around a new fact. The envoy's line, 3 nights back, "The sect is done playing the long game," hadn't been theater. It had been a filed notice, the kind opposing counsel sends you right before they stop calling and start showing up. "How sure are you?" "Sure enough to walk 2 days instead of sending a bird a raider could shoot down." Mei Lin's grin was thin and entirely without humor for once. I've been wrong about weather. I have never once been wrong about an army. I took her to Wanqing. She didn't flinch at the number, or the timeline, or the fact that the warning had come from a scout she'd never met instead of a sec channel that should have caught it first. She just went very still, the specific stillness of a woman doing the math on how much city she could actually hold with what she had, and said, 3 days, in a voice with all the frost back in it, the clan head fully surfacing over the woman who'd stood in a courtyard with me the night before. 3 days, I agreed. Which is either not enough time to prepare a defense, or exactly enough time to make sure the defense we can't win looks expensive enough that they'd rather not pay for it. She looked at me. You have an idea. I have a lawyer's idea, which is worse and better than a general's. I turned to Mei Lin, who was watching the two of us with the alert, cataloging attention of someone deciding in real time whether she'd walked into a war room or a marriage. You said you run the watch line. Will you get me eyes on their formation before they're close enough to matter, banner counts, supply train, who's actually leading it? That's the job, she said. Nobody ever asks nicely for it, though. I'm asking nicely. Also going to need you to not die doing it. Because you're the only person who's told either of us the truth this morning, and I've developed a professional appreciation for that. Something in her sharp face shifted. Not quite trust, not yet. But the first crack in the reflexive suspicion of a woman who'd spent her whole life on the outer edge of a clan that never once looked past the inner court. She said. Heng was right. You're funny. She was already turning for the gate. Give me a day. I'll bring you numbers instead of rumors. She was gone before either of us could thank her, which I was learning was the entire shape of Mei Lin. She did the useful thing and left before the gratitude could slow her down. I spent that day and the next doing the only kind of war a divorce lawyer is actually good at fighting. I went through every scrap of Goldfall's own sect law, every treaty Yunzhou's crown had ever signed about occupation and casus belli, every precedent for a sect moving armed force against a clan over an unresolved marriage claim, because if Mei Lin was right and this was a column, not a raid, then somewhere in that column's justification was a paper trail. When paper trails were the one battlefield where the Sioux clan's newest asset didn't need a sword. Wanqing spent it differently. She emptied the armory, drilled the guard until their forms stopped looking decorative, and sent riders to every allied house that owed the Sioux clan a debt worth calling in, which, I was learning, was fewer houses than 8 years of being married to a joke had led either of us to expect. Power respects power. It does not rush to defend a clan everyone still half believes is cursed. Mei Lin came back on the second evening, dust to the knee, with numbers instead of rumors exactly as promised, a column of 600, gold and white, siege ladders, and a formation captain who wasn't Yan Zhou, a competent senior nobody in Cloudfall had a name for yet, which told me everything about how seriously Goldfall was taking this. You send your prodigy to win a bride, you send a professional to take a city. They reached the walls on the morning of the third day, and by noon Cloudfall wasn't a city under threat. It was a city under new management. Wanqing made the call in under 3 seconds. She pressed her palm back to the stone, fed it her chi, when the amber characters lurched through their reset cycle like a gate being forced open by someone who'd already picked the lock once and didn't care about the damage. The crack in the cliff widened. Cold air poured out, carrying the smell of wet mineral and something older, something that had been sealed in the dark for a long time and was not happy about the company. We went in single file, Mei Lin first, because she'd have fought anyone who tried to take that position. Wanqing second, her frost-edged longsword drawn and trailing a thin mist that clung to the stone walls. Me last, because I was the one with no sword, no combat art, and no business being here except that the man who could see the trap was the one you wanted walking behind everyone else. The passage dropped fast. Within 100 paces we'd left daylight behind entirely, and the walls narrowed until my shoulders brushed cold stone on both sides. Mei Lin moved by touch, her fingers reading the rock the way a blind man reads a face, texture, temperature, moisture. Oh, she stopped twice, once to avoid a hairline crack in the floor that she said was a pressure trigger, once to point at a seam in the ceiling that looked decorative and wasn't. Formation line, she whispered. Someone wired this corridor, recently. Work's sloppy, but the intent is clear. Anyone following the first group through gets pinched. I studied the seam. She was right. The carving was fresh, the chi residue still faintly luminous. Whoever had gone in ahead of us, and I was betting hard on Su Lan's allies, some splinter faction with a forged blood key, hadn't just opened the realm. They'd booby-trapped the front door on their way in. Can you disable it? Wanqing asked. Mei Lin shook her head. Not without the right tools in about an hour. But I can map the safe path. Give me a minute. She didn't need a minute. She needed about 20 seconds and a handful of thrown pebbles, each one landing on a specific floor tile and staying or vanishing based on whether the tile was solid or wired. The ones that vanished echoed with a sharp, skeletal crack. Mei Lin mapped the corridor in a zigzag of safe stones, and we followed her footwork exactly. When I filed her technique away under things I would have charged a client 300 an hour to learn. The passage opened into a cavern, and the cavern opened into something that made my legal brain sit up and pay attention. It was vast. A cathedral of black stone, the ceiling lost in dark, the floor a maze of raised platforms connected by narrow stone bridges over a chasm that glowed faint green from below, spirit vein runoff, the same energy that fed the healing pool Tianyu needed. The bridges weren't decorative, they were a formation grid. Each platform was a node, each bridge a conduit, and the whole thing hummed with a low subsonic vibration that rattled my jawbone before I heard it. The bridge behind us lit up, not with light, but with force. A wall of compressed air slammed across the gap, sealing the passage back. Ahead, the next two bridges began cycling, their surfaces rippling with chi that would shred anything standing on them when the cycle completed. Triggered formation, Wanqing said, her voice flat. She had already raised her sword, frost crawling down the blade. Combat grade. One calibrated it to the realm's existing grid and set it to activate on entry. Which means they knew the grid, I said, my eyes moving across the platforms, counting nodes, tracing conduits. One who'd been here before. Or someone who had a map from someone who had. The senior sister. The one who vanished. The one who'd found something in the record she couldn't face. I didn't say it. I didn't have to. I felt the sour note through the bond. Wanqing had already arrived there. The bridges cycled. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, a rhythm as precise as a metronome. I counted. Mei Lin counted. Wanqing didn't need to count. She could feel the chi pulse through her gold core senses and time it to her heartbeat. 2-second window on each bridge, I said. That's tight for me. That's a jog for you two. For me, it's a step, Wanqing said, and she was right. She could cross the entire grid in a blur if she wanted to, but the formation wasn't just timing. The nodes themselves were keyed. I could see the faint difference in the key signatures, some platforms humming warm, some cold, and the bridges between them only cycling during specific node pair activations. It wasn't a straight path. It was a combination lock. Step on the wrong node, and you'd trigger a cascade that would bring the whole grid down on your head. I need 30 seconds, I said, and crouched where the platform met the void, watching the cycles. This was reading a settlement schedule and finding the clause that let you skip the queue. Every formation has a logic, a designer's intent, a priority hierarchy, a sequence that says this before that always. The person who'd wired this grid was competent but rushed. They piggybacked their trap onto the realm's original architecture instead of building a standalone system, which meant the trap inherited the original formation's rules. And the original formation wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to guide, to route intruders along a specific path, toward the heart of the realm, toward the pool. I traced the warm nodes. They formed a line, not straight, but deliberate, a path that curved left across 3 platforms, and then down through a lower tier. The cold nodes were the traps. The warm nodes were the road. Warm platforms only, I said. Left curve, then down. Original builders wanted visitors to reach the pool. Our friend's trap is keyed to the cold nodes. Anyone who panics and takes the wrong bridge hits the cascade. But if we follow the original path, the trap doesn't even register us. Wanqing gave me a look I'd been cataloging for weeks, the one that said I'm annoyed that you're right, and I'm more annoyed that I'm not surprised. Nothing happened. The bridge ahead cycled, and she walked through it like a door that had been left open for her. Mei Lin went next, fast and light, her face split with a grin that said she was having the time of her life. I went last, timing my steps to the 2-second windows, moving with the careful, unhurried pace of a man who knew exactly where the floor was solid because he'd read the blueprint. 3 platforms in, the beast found us. It came from the chasm, a sound like stone tearing, and then a shape climbing the far wall with too many legs. A spider. No. Something a spider would have nightmares about. Body the size of a cart, 8 legs tipped in quartz-hard chitin, eyes that glowed the same faint green as the runoff below. Spirit beast. Old. Territorial. Very, very awake. It landed on the cold node directly ahead of us, and the trap formation didn't trigger because the beast was part of the realm's original ecosystem, keyed into the grid as a guardian, exempt from the very traps it was meant to drive intruders into. Well, Mei Lin said, drawing her knife with the calm of someone who'd chosen her weapon a long time ago and hadn't second-guessed it since. That's the welcoming committee. Wan Qing moved. The frost flower of Cloudfall didn't wait for threats to develop, she cut them out of the timeline. Her sword traced a line of frost through the dark air, and the beast skittered sideways with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. Chitin scraped stone. A leg swept at her, and she redirected it with the flat of her blade, the impact sending a crack across the platform that I felt through my feet. Mei Lin, right flank, Wan Qing said, and Mei Lin was already there, sliding under a sweeping leg, her knife finding the joint between chitin plates and dragging a line of ichor that hissed on contact with the stone. My job was clear. I was not a fighter. I was the man with the map. I tracked the beast's movement against the grid, which nodes it touched, which bridges activated when it shifted weight, where the safe footing was and where it wasn't. When the spider lunged and drove Wan Qing back 2 platforms, I called the retreat path. When it reared and slammed its front legs down, triggering a cold node cascade that would have gutted anyone standing on the adjacent bridge, I shouted left, and Mei Lin pivoted on a coin's edge, landing on a warm node while the cascade shredded the empty air behind her. This was what I was, not a sword, a compass, the man standing behind 2 fighters and telling them where the ground was solid. Wan Qing found the opening. The beast's underbelly, soft, unpigmented, exposed when it reared to strike. She went under it. Not around, not over, under, fighting beneath the massive body on a platform that shouldn't have held her weight, but did because I'd already confirmed it was a warm node. When her blade came up in a single, devastating line that opened the creature from thorax to abdomen. The beast screamed, a sound like a grinding mill, and collapsed. It didn't die cleanly, but it died, and the green glow from the chasm flickered once as its chi fed back into the realm's grid. Wan Qing stood over it, breathing hard, frost sublimating off her blade. Mei Lin wiped her knife on the beast's carapace and grinned at me. Nice directions, husband. You ever want to quit the clan life? I could use a navigator. I didn't answer. My eyes were on the far end of the cavern, where the final bridge led to a carved archway, the entrance to the inner chamber, the heart of the realm, where the spirit vein pool sat waiting to save an old man's life. The archway was lit, not by the realm's ambient glow, by lanterns. Travel lanterns, set in a row along the passage walls, the kind that scouts carried when they planned to be underground for hours. And beyond the archway, echoing up through the stone, I heard voices, multiple, human, organized, low-clipped cadence of people who had a plan and were executing it. Mei Lin heard it too. Her grin died. She pressed herself against the cavern wall and tilted her head, parsing the sound the way she parsed wind patterns, direction, distance, count. Oh, 6, she mouthed. Maybe 8. Armed. They're not panicking, they're working. Wan Qing's sword hand tightened. Oh, a sudden rhyme crawled across the steel, and the temperature around us dropped until I could see my breath. Someone sent a full team. I looked at the lanterns, at the organized voices, at the trap grid behind us that someone had wired specifically to slow down anyone following. This wasn't opportunistic. This was an expedition, funded, planned, and timed to beat us to the prize. And they were already inside the chamber housing the sole remedy for Elder Tianyu's fading life. We didn't sneak. You don't sneak when you're traveling with a gold core sword saint whose presence is essentially a walking blizzard. We walked through the archway with the kind of deliberate, heavy rhythm that tells an enemy you aren't trapped, you're the ones doing the trapping. The inner chamber was a bowl of shimmering obsidian, the center dominated by the spirit vein pool. It wasn't a lake, it was a concentrated lens of liquid moonlight, radiating a low thrum that set the marrow in my bones to shaking. And standing around it was the raid team. 6 cultivators in charcoal gray gear, professional and efficient, led by a man who wore the polished, prefabricated malice of a mid-level antagonist. High cheekbones, a thin, groomed beard, and the arrogant stillness of a Pillar Realm cultivator who thought he was the smartest person in the room. The direct line, the leader said, his voice echoing off the black walls. He didn't look surprised to see Wan Qing. He looked like he'd been expecting her, and was simply annoyed she'd arrived before he'd finished packing. I must admit, I underestimated the Frostflower's resolve, or perhaps she just missed the smell of old stone. He didn't acknowledge me. I was the gray smudge in the back, the accessory to the asset. I liked it. While he was busy playing the power game with Wan Qing, I was doing what I do best. I was reading the room. The pool wasn't just sitting there. It was the anchor for the entire realm's stability. I could see the flow of qi, not as a gold core does, but as the system translates it for me, and the lines were frayed. The raid team hadn't just found the pool, they were actively siphoning it. They had 3 heavy-grade spirit jars anchored to the basin, drawing the moonlight out in steady, greedy streams. The pool is for Elder Tianyu, Wan Qing said, her voice a sliver of ice. Remove your jars, or I will remove your hands. The leader laughed. It was a dry, clinical sound. A touching sentiment, but the Su clan's internal politics are so tedious. My employers have a much higher valuation for this essence. By the time we're finished, there won't be enough left to wash a foot, let alone anchor a dying elder's base. He shifted his weight, and I saw the tell. He wasn't just guarding the pool, he was standing on a specific intersection of the obsidian floor. With the same logic as the bridges, he was the key to a secondary formation. If Wan Qing lunged, he wouldn't fight her with a sword, he'd trigger a collapse of the basin, burying the pool and everyone in it under 1,000 tons of volcanic glass. It was a classic deadlock, a hostage situation where the hostage was the prize, and the kidnapper was the floor. Wait, I said, stepping forward. The leader finally looked at me. His eyes swept over my drab robes, my lack of a weapon, and the sheer, baffling insignificance of my presence. He smiled. It was the smile one reserves for a stray dog wandering into a manicured garden. The live-in husband. Tell me, does the Su clan provide a stipend for the furniture, or do you just eat the scraps from the table? I didn't even blink. I dealt with corporate raiders who had better wardrobes and worse breath. I'm the one who handles the contracts, I said, my voice steady, the lawyer in me sliding into the driver's seat. And as a specialist in fine print, I noticed something about this realm. The Su ancestral laws are very specific about the spirit vein pool. It's a blood-anchored resource. It doesn't just provide energy, it requires a continuous, compatible resonance to remain stable while being extracted. The leader's smile didn't vanish, but it stiffened. I'm sure you're very proud of your reading habits, boy. I'm sure you are too, I replied, glancing at the jars. Which is why you're wondering why the 3rd jar is vibrating. See, the pool isn't just a tank of fuel. It's a living circuit. You've drawn too much, too fast, without a direct line anchor to balance the flow. Well, you haven't just siphoned the energy, you've created a vacuum. And in a realm this unstable, a vacuum is just another word for an implosion. I watched his eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked at the jars. The 3rd one was indeed humming, a low, angry thrum that was starting to ripple the surface of the moonlight water. You're bluffing, he said, but the confidence had a hairline fracture in it. Am I? Look at the basin's edge. Obsidian is cracking. Not from your weight, but from the pressure differential. He looked. He saw the hairline fractures. And in that second of doubt, that one tiny window where he stopped being a predator and started being a victim of his own ignorance, I saw the opening. Wan Qing, I said, now. She didn't need a second invitation. She didn't attack the man, she attacked the jars. A single, blindingly fast arc of frost steel sheared through the anchors of the first 2 jars, shattering the seals. The sudden release of pressure didn't cause an implosion, it caused a surge. The siphoned energy, no longer contained, snapped back toward the source with the force of a tidal wave. The raid leader screamed as the vacuum he'd created turned into a physical blow, the backlash of the spirit vein hitting him like a mountain. He was thrown backward, his formation key broken, his composure obliterated. His team tried to react, but they were fighting a current of raw, unfiltered qi that belonged to the Sioux bloodline. It didn't see them as cultivators, it saw them as pollutants. A surge washed over the room, but as it hit me, the system flared. Boon activated. Resonance absorption. Direct line surge detected. Channeling through Hearthbond. It wasn't like the slow trickle of the first few days. This was a flood. I felt the energy roar through the bond thread, filtered through Wanqing's gold core refinement, and hammered into my own vessel. It was violent. It was overwhelming. It felt like my veins were being replaced by molten silver. Devotion tier jump. Tier 3. Vessel refinement. The bloom sharpens. Cultivation breakthrough. Body temper to Qi Si, stage 4. I didn't just feel stronger. I felt clearer. The dull ache of the original Zhongmu's body vanished, replaced by a humming, electric vitality. The bloom hit a new gear. My posture didn't just straighten, it commanded. My voice dropped an octave, settling into a resonance that felt like a physical weight in the room. I could feel the air around me thickening, my presence expanding until I wasn't just a smudge in the background, I was the center of gravity. And I kept it all hidden. I clamped down on the aura, shoving the Qi Si breakthrough deep into my core, wrapping it in a layer of strategic invisibility. To the world, I was still the doormat. To the system, I was a goldmine. The raid team was a mess of broken ribs and shattered pride. Wanqing didn't waste time on them. She stepped toward the pool, her expression a mix of fury and relief. She secured the essence for Elder Tianyu, her movements efficient and cold, but as her gaze drifted my way, the frost melted. The bond thread wasn't just humming, it was glowing, a vivid golden filament that seemed to pull us together. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see the husband she'd been told to tolerate. She saw the man who had just dismantled a Pillar Realm strategist with a few sentences and a bit of reading. Her eyes traveled up to my face, and I saw the flicker of the flywheel in action. The bloom was leaking. The magnetism I couldn't hide was pulling at her, dragging her gaze to my mouth, then back to my eyes. The silence between us wasn't the silence of the banquet hall. It was the silence of a fuse burning down. She leaned in. It was just a fraction. I could smell the scent of winter air and ozone clinging to her robes. I didn't move. I didn't reach. I just let the tension build, the lawyer in me knowing that the best deals are closed in the silence right before the signature. Her breath was a ghost of a touch against my lips. I could see the gray of her eyes softening, the ice finally cracking under the weight of a genuine, involuntary pull. And then the world screamed. A sound like 1,000 mirrors shattering at once ripped through the chamber. The obsidian floor beneath us lurched, a massive fissure opening exactly where the raid leader had been standing. The shimmering moonlight of the pool turned a violent, bruised purple, and the ceiling began to rain shards of black glass. The anchor, Wanqing gasped, snapping back to reality as the floor tilted 45 degrees. The siphoning. They didn't just take the energy, they broke the realm's spine. I looked up just as a section of the vaulted ceiling collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris roaring toward us. The ancestral realm wasn't just unstable anymore. It was folding in on itself. The floor didn't just tilt, it vanished. One second we were standing on the ancestral pride of the Sioux clan, and the next, the obsidian was screaming, splitting into a jagged maw that wanted to swallow the pool, the raid team, and us along with it. Wanqing reacted with the instinct of a woman who had spent her life fighting the wind. She didn't hesitate, her arms snapping out to lock around my waist, hauling me back from the edge of a widening fissure. The force of it slammed me against her side, and for a heartbeat, the world was just the scent of ozone and the terrifying, absolute strength of a gold core. "Mei Lin, move!" she commanded. The scout was already a blur, leaping from a falling slab to a protruding ledge, her eyes wide but her feet sure. She didn't look back, she knew we were the anchor, but the realm wasn't just collapsing, it was convulsing. A spire of black glass sheared off the ceiling and came down like a guillotine, aimed directly at the spot where Wanqing had just planted her feet. I didn't have time to calculate the physics. I didn't have a weapon to parry it. All I had was a Qi Si that felt like a pressurized boiler and a lawyer's sense of timing. I stepped into the gap. I didn't try to block the spire, that would be like trying to stop a landslide with a prayer. Instead, I pivoted, throwing my entire weight into a focused burst of the new energy humming in my marrow. I didn't aim for the stone, I aimed for the air. I released a sharp, concussive pulse of ki, a raw shockwave that didn't break the spire but shoved us both 3 feet to the left, just as the black glass pulverized the floor where we'd been standing. The impact of the surge sent a jolt through my shoulder, a grinding heat that told me I was playing with a vessel that still had leaks. But as we tumbled across the shaking stone, something happened. The system didn't just chime, it roared. Shared peril. Mutual protection triggered. Payout. Double devotion. Regard. 18% to 26%. Plus 2 boons plus 48 devotion. The rush was instantaneous. It wasn't the slow climb of the banquet hall or the steady pulse of the bridges. It was a lightning strike. The bond thread, that golden filament between us, flared into a blinding cord of light, vibrating with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I could feel her, not just her presence, but the sudden, violent spike of her heart rate, the flash of genuine alarm, and the instinctive, crushing grip she had on my arm. She wasn't protecting a husband. She was reacting to a body that had braced itself against a falling sky to keep her from being crushed. My vision sharpened, mapping every jagged spiderweb etched into the descending stone. My voice, when I spoke, didn't just carry, it cut. The exit is shifting, I yelled over the grinding roar of the realm. The archway is gone, but the spirit vein is venting. Follow the purple light. Wanqing didn't question me. She couldn't. The flywheel was spinning now, the momentum of the last few minutes dragging her into a state of absolute trust that she hadn't even processed yet. She hauled me up, her fingers digging into my robes, and we sprinted. It was a descent into madness. We ran through corridors that were folding like paper, leaping over gaps that breathed fire and dodging shards of obsidian that rained down like frozen needles. Mei Lin was a ghost ahead of us, guiding the path, but the realm was actively trying to purge us. Every few steps, the ground would liquefy or the air would thicken into a wall of crushing pressure. At one point, a section of the ceiling gave way entirely, dropping a slab of rock the size of a carriage directly above us. Wanqing didn't even look up. She just swung her longsword in a brutal, shimmering arc. The frost steel didn't just cut the rock, it froze the entire structure in a split second, turning the falling debris into a temporary bridge of ice that we scrambled across before it shattered into a million diamonds. We hit the final stretch, a narrow, sloping tunnel that smelled of old ozone and desperation. The light at the end wasn't the soft glow of the entrance, but a harsh, flickering amber. As we burst through the threshold and back into the humid air of the outer caves, we didn't find silence. A man was waiting for us. He was dressed in robes the color of road dust, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring everything but a thin, knowing smile. He didn't have a sword. He didn't have an aura. He looked like a wandering scholar who had gotten lost on the way to a tea house, and yet he anchored the swirling wreckage with a stillness that made the surrounding collapse seem like a distant memory. He didn't look at Wanqing, the gold-core genius who could have ended him in a heartbeat. He looked at me. His eyes were like 2 polished coins, reflecting a version of me I didn't recognize, something sharper, heavier, or something that didn't belong in a doormat's clothes. A precarious escape, the man said, his voice as dry as parchment. The realm has a habit of keeping what it finds interesting. Wanqing stepped forward, her sword still humming, the frost not yet receded from her blade. Who are you? Well, how did you get past the seals? The man didn't answer her. He didn't even acknowledge she had spoken. He kept his gaze locked on me, his smile widening just a fraction, as if he could see the golden thread still vibrating in the air between us. The vessel is refining faster than anticipated, he murmured, almost to himself. Old strategy, fattening the thread while the house is on fire. I wonder, when the weight of that bond finally snaps, will you be the one holding the leash, or the one wearing it? Before Wanqing could demand an explanation, the man stepped backward. We didn't walk. He simply faded, his form blurring into the gray mist of the caves until he was nothing more than a smudge of dust on the wind. Who was that? Mei Lin asked, her knife still out, her eyes scanning the perimeter. A ghost, I muttered, feeling the lingering heat of the devotion jump settling in my core. The bloom was humming, a quiet, magnetic pressure that made the air feel thick around my skin. Or a warning. Wanqing didn't say anything. Oh, she didn't have to. She was looking at me, really looking at me, and the expression on her face was a battlefield. There was the ice, yes, the ingrained habit of the frost flower, but beneath it was a flicker of something raw and confused. She was stitching together the image of the husband who hauled water and the stranger who had wrestled a collapsing dimension and shifted her world off a falling rock. For a moment, I thought she might actually say something. I thought the ice might finally crack for good. Then, the wind shifted. Scent hit us, not the smell of the caves, but the smell of burning cedar and scorched earth. It was coming from the direction of the city. We didn't wait. We moved fast, Mei Lin leading the sprint, watching a blur of blue and silver beside me. As we crested the final ridge that overlooked the valley leading back to the Sioux estate, the sight stopped us dead. Cloudfall City was visible in the distance, but the skyline was wrong. Plumes of black smoke were rising in organized columns, cutting through the morning mist. The horizon wasn't clear, it was crowded. Great, shimmering banners of gold and white, the colors of the Goldfall sect, were draped across the main gates. The city wasn't just under pressure, it was occupied. I could see the flashes of chi in the distance, the rhythmic explosions of a coordinated assault. The Goldfall young masters hadn't waited for the diplomacy of a duel or the slow crawl of a legal petition. While we were digging through the ancestral dirt to save an elder, the Goldfall sect had moved on Cloudfall. And from the look of the fires, they weren't looking for a negotiation. The descent from the ridges was a blur of adrenaline and ash. We didn't stop to catch our breath. We didn't even stop to discuss the dust-robed man and his riddles about leashes. There was no one to tell but the wind, and the wind was currently carrying the scent of a city being dismantled. As we hit the outskirts of Cloudfall, the scale of the disaster became clear. Goldfall sect hadn't just sent a raiding party, they'd deployed a containment force. Gold and white banners snapped in the breeze, marking every major intersection. Our disciples were stationed at the checkpoints like an occupying army, their faces masks of bored superiority. They weren't burning the city to the ground, that would be wasteful, but they were stripping it. I saw spirit stone warehouses being emptied, ancestral shrines stripped of their jade ornaments, and Sioux clan disciples being lined up in the streets, stripped of their weapons and their dignity. It was a corporate takeover executed with the precision of a butcher. Wanqing was a storm. The moment we stepped into the main thoroughfare, the air around her dropped 20 degrees. Her longsword didn't leave its sheath, but the frost along the edge was humming, a low, auditory vibration that made the Goldfall sentries instinctively step back. "Where is the sect leader's representative?" she demanded, her voice a blade of ice that sliced through the chaos of the street. A man stepped forward, not Yan Zhou, but one of his seniors, a Pillar Realm cultivator, with a sneer etched permanently into his features. He looked at Wanqing, then his eyes drifted to me. He didn't see a threat, he saw a drab-robed accessory, a piece of baggage she'd dragged back from the ancestral realm. "The Sioux clan is in a state of transition," the senior said, his tone dripping with a curated kind of pity. "Your family's debts to the Goldfall sect have come due. Since you were so preoccupied with your dead ancestors, we decided to collect the interest in advance. By the time you return, the Sioux estate will be a Goldfall annex, and you, Frostflower, will be a guest of honor in our inner court. Whether as a disciple or a concubine is entirely up to how well you negotiate." Wanqing's aura flared. While cobblestones beneath her feet cracked, a web of frost exploding outward. She was a second away from turning the street into a graveyard, and while I admired the efficiency of a goldcore strike, I knew the math. If she fought now, she'd kill a dozen disciples, but the sect would use it as a legal pretext to execute the rest of the clan for rebellion. I stepped forward, placing a hand on the small of her back. It was a gamble, a move of sheer audacity, but I felt her tension spike, then settle. The flywheel was still spinning, she didn't push me away. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting with that new, heavy resonance of the Qi, though I kept the actual power coiled tight. "I think we can skip the part where you pretend this is about debt and move straight to the part where we discuss the buyout." The senior laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "The husband speaks. Well, tell me, does the furniture now offer financial advice?" I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I reached into the folds of my robes and produced the essence container we'd secured from the spirit vein pool. Liquid moonlight inside pulsed with a rhythmic thrum that drew the Goldfall disciples forward, their greed overriding their discipline, enough to jumpstart a dozen Pillar Realm breakthroughs. It's not a debt payment, it's a premium. The senior's sneer faltered. He knew the value of that concentrate. Oh, it was a king's ransom in a bottle. And, I continued, my tone shifting to the cold, transactional cadence of a surgeon who has spotted the single fatal flaw in a patient's anatomy, I believe we should discuss the status of Yan Zhou's claim. He attempted to claim the Su heir through a duel of challenge. That challenge was formally accepted and witnessed by the laws of the Goldfall sect's own code, which I've spent the last few hours memorizing. A failed challenge of claim doesn't just end the bid, it creates a prestige debt. Yan Zhou didn't just lose, he was humiliated. He now owes the Su clan a formal reparation in spirit stones and face, or he risks a permanent mark on his sect record. The senior stared at me. He was trying to calculate where the doormat had suddenly acquired a brain. I didn't give him time to recover. Here is the deal, I said, stepping closer, the bloom leaking just enough to make him feel the sudden, inexplicable weight of my presence. Would you take the essence? You withdraw your forces from the city. You acknowledge the Su clan's sovereignty over Cloudfall. In exchange, we don't file a formal grievance with the Yunzhou overseers regarding the illegal occupation of a sovereign clan's territory and the blatant violation of the duel of claim protocols. We call the debt in. Yan Zhou pays his reparations quietly. When everyone pretends the Goldfall sect didn't just get outplayed by a live-in husband. The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel Wan Qing beside me, her gray eyes wide, her gaze fixed on the side of my face. She wasn't just surprised, she was fascinated. I could feel the bond thread vibrating, a warm, golden hum of genuine, bewildered respect. The senior looked at the essence. He looked at the smoke rising from the city. He looked at the lethal, frozen stillness of Su Wan Qing. You're gambling on the fact that we want the essence more than we want the city, he muttered. I'm gambling on the fact that your sect leader hates a public scandal more than he loves a few city blocks, I replied. And trust me, I know exactly how much a scandal costs in this kingdom. He spat on the ground, but he stepped aside. Fine. The essence is a fair trade for the embarrassment. We withdraw at sunset. But don't think this makes you a player in this game, boy. I don't want to be a player, I said, a small dangerous smile touching my lips. I just want my house back. As the Goldfall forces began their orderly retreat, the atmosphere in the city shifted from terror to a stunned, humming electricity. The Su clan disciples, seeing their heir return not just with the ancestral prize but with the occupying army in retreat, didn't just cheer, they converged. The old habit of being shoved aside had finally broken. I was being flanked. The elders, the cousins, the servants, they all looked at me with a new, hungry kind of curiosity. I had just negotiated the survival of their home using a bottle of moonlight and a loophole. Amidst a culture that only bowed to the blade, I had just demonstrated a different kind of power, the ability to make the strong do exactly what I wanted. I was no longer the joke. I was the enigma. We returned to the Su estate to find the halls filled with the remnants of the occupation, but the air was different. The oppressive weight of the live-in husband label had vanished, replaced by a cautious, shimmering respect. Wan Qing walked beside me, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine, her silence no longer a wall but a question. That evening, as the last of the gold banners disappeared from the horizon, a messenger arrived. He didn't wear the colors of the city or the sect. He wore the stark, midnight blue and silver of the imperial court, carrying a scroll sealed with a wax stamp that made every elder in the room stop breathing. Wan Qing took the scroll. Her fingers trembled, just a fraction, as she broke the seal. Yunzhou convocation, she whispered, her voice breathless. The convocation was the event of a decade. A gathering of the most monstrously talented prodigies in the kingdom, a place where realms were jumped and legacies were forged. It was a closed circle, an invitation-only slaughterhouse of ambition where the elite decided who would actually matter in the coming era. She looked down at the parchment, and then she looked at me. Her pale gray eyes were wide, searching my face as if trying to find the secret I was hiding. The invitation is for the Su clan's representatives, she said, her voice trembling. But it's not just for me. I leaned in to read the scroll. There, in the elegant, sweeping calligraphy of the imperial court, were two names. Su Wan Qing, Zhang Mu. The room went dead silent. The elders looked at the paper as if it were a cursed object. The joke of the family, the man who couldn't cultivate a single spark of chi for 8 years, had been summoned to the highest stage in the kingdom. I felt the system flare behind my eyes, a gold panel sliding into view with a level of urgency I hadn't seen before. Event trigger: the Yunzhou convocation. Condition: public exposure imminent. Warning: the bloom can no longer be dismissed as eating well. I looked at Wanqing. She didn't look horrified. She looked challenged. A small, rare spark of something that looked like a smile touched her lips, a mirror to the one on my own. The game of hiding in the shadows was over. The doormat was being called to the center of the stage, and for the first time, I realized that the only thing more dangerous than being the joke was being the one who finally told it. The imperial invitation didn't just change the conversation, it changed the physics of the Su estate. For 8 years, I had been the ghost in the hallway, the man people walked around without seeing. Now, I had become the anchor for every gaze in the room. The elders didn't just look at me, they studied me. Their eyes scanning my posture and the clarity of my skin, as if they could read my cultivation level through a visual autopsy. The bloom was no longer a subtle suggestion, it was a statement. I could feel it humming under my skin, a magnetic weight that pressed against the breath of everyone in the room. I played it off with a few self-deprecating shrugs and a few more comments about the quality of the clan's recent medicinal soups, but the lie was wearing thin. I wasn't a doormat anymore, I was a mystery, and in a clan like the Su, mysteries are either assets to be leveraged or threats to be eliminated. Aunt Su Lan, of course, was the latter. She hadn't been seen since the Goldfall retreat. She'd vanished into the quiet corners of the estate, the kind of silence that usually precedes a landslide. I spent the 3 days leading up to our departure for the capital reading the room. The air in the main hall was too still, the servants too eager to please. It was the exact atmosphere of a courtroom right before a surprise witness is called to the stand. "You're thinking too much," Wanqing said. She had found me in the library, leaning over a map of the Yunzhou provinces. She was wearing her deep blue robes, the white sash tied with a precision that matched her sword hand. She didn't stand at a distance anymore. She stood close enough that I could feel the cool radiance of her gold core aura, and the bond thread between us was no longer a flicker. It was a steady, golden pulse. I looked up and caught her eyes. There was no ice there, not entirely. There was a curiosity that bordered on hunger, a silent question about who I actually was. "I'm not thinking," I lied, giving her that half-smile. "I'm just calculating the odds of us making it to the capital without someone trying to poison my tea." "If they do," she murmured, her voice dropping a half-octave, "I'll freeze the cup before it touches your lips." Regard, 26% to 29%. +1 boon, +15 devotion. The system chimed, and a fresh wave of warmth settled into my marrow. It wasn't a massive jump, but the consistency was what mattered. The flywheel was locked in. The more she stepped into the role of my protector, the more she noticed the man she was protecting, and the more she noticed, the more she cared. It was a beautiful, recursive loop of power, but the loop was interrupted by a scream. It didn't come from the gardens or the training grounds. It came from the ancestral vault, the very heart of the clan's spiritual authority. We didn't run, we blurred. Wanqing was a streak of blue and silver, and I was right beside her, my chi surging to keep pace. When we burst through the vault doors, the scene was a choreographed disaster. Elder Hanzhou, whose decade-long mask of a blind devotee had finally slipped, was standing over a shattered jade plinth. The plinth held the Su clan's heart seal, the physical manifestation of their sovereignty over Cloudfall. The seal wasn't just cracked, it was dissolving, the jade turning into a gray, necrotic ash. And standing there, looking profoundly shocked, was Aunt Su Lan. "Oh, the horror!" she exclaimed, her voice a perfect, curated tragedy. "Elder Hanzhou, how could you?" "Oh, sabotage the seal in the final hour before the convocation. The Su clan will be stripped of its standing. We will be disgraced before the imperial court." The other elders arrived in a flurry, the room erupting into chaos. Hanzhou didn't defend himself. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing, claiming he'd been tricked by a foreign agent who had promised him a breakthrough in exchange for a small favor. It was a classic play, the fall guy, the shocked witness, and the inevitable conclusion. If the seal was destroyed, Wanqing's authority as clan head would be legally voided upon arrival at the capital. The imperial court wouldn't recognize a leader without a seal. Su Lan would step in as regent, to preserve the clan's honor, and the joke husband would be the first piece of trash swept out of the house. I hovered on the periphery of the shouting match, watching the way Su Lan's eyes flickered toward the ash. She ignored the tragedy, her focus anchored instead to the ticking clock. I didn't have to. The bloom did the work for me. The resonance of my voice cut through the noise like a gavel, and the room went silent. I walked toward the plinth, my eyes scanning the residue of the ash. "It's a very convincing performance," I said, glancing at Su Lan. "Oh, an agent,